There were no oxygen tanks anywhere, not even a stray tube. And Yi-Han found himself wondering what use these people had even been. He searched for a long while but turned up nothing related to diving, which left him considering whether he might fashion a breathing tube himself. If it were long enough and didn't leak, it would let him breathe underwater. The only materials he had on hand were various animal skins, and shaping something like that out of hide proved far harder than it sounded. So he gave up on it for the moment and called Linger to keep wandering the mountain with him. The instant he patted its head, Linger let out a happy sound and crawled up onto his legs, wrapping around them so tightly he found himself unable to take a single step, and he had to laugh and groan at once as he told it to get down. It had grown far too heavy, nothing like the newborn weight that used to just barely register on his arm. Now that it had eaten so much, its bulk had shot up enough to actually hinder his movement. Linger seemed a little hurt by being pushed off, but slid down obediently all the same, and the two of them returned to the peak to keep exploring. This time focusing on the areas the map hadn't already revealed, since he'd finished combing through everything shown on it. It occurred to him to put Linger's nose to use, so he pulled a chunk of secret star silver mine from his resource column and held it up for Linger to sniff, reasoning that a mist beast of its caliber ought to have an extraordinarily keen sense of smell. And sure enough, despite a flicker of reluctance, Linger nodded and started leading him forward. Yi-Han could have kicked himself for not thinking of using its nose for targeted searching sooner, grinning as the thought settled in, and he found himself turning over just what other uses Linger might have. Bouncer, portable lighter, hunting hound. Those were the 3 uses he'd worked out so far, but he was sure there had to be more. Could he get it to spray water so he could actually take a shower? His skin was starting to feel sour and grimy, and he badly wanted to wash himself and his clothes, especially since he happened to have a bottle of laundry detergent on hand. Something he'd casually bought off another survivor on the trading post. Turning over the 100 possible uses of Linger in his head, he followed it up the mountainside. Along the way, they ran into 2 blind first-star mist beasts. Even with the searchlight in hand, Yi-Han couldn't make out any trace of them past 10 meters, but Linger's senses were sharp enough to catch their tracks well before that. And before he even registered what was happening, it had already darted out, killed one on the spot, and swallowed it whole, leaving nothing behind but a smear of blood. First-star mist beasts didn't drop loot and triggered no notification on the survival panel, so Yi-Han never even found out what kind of beast it had been. As they neared the top of the mountain and still hadn't arrived, he asked Linger why it was taking so long, and Linger wagged its tail and pointed ahead, meaning the way forward led down the other side. So the open-air deposit wasn't even on this mountain at all. He asked what kind of terrain lay ahead, since the searchlight couldn't reach far enough for him to see for himself. He made a note that he really needed to perform enlightenment on it the next day, and had Linger answer by shaking its head for no and nodding for yes. Was it a lake? Linger shook its head. Was it a mountain? Linger nodded, meaning yet another mountain rose beyond this one. He groaned inwardly at the thought and asked how far it was and how long the crossing would take, but Linger had no way to answer that. Being newborn, it hadn't yet grasped the concept of time. He decided to just walk and see, telling himself that with Linger around and a good supply of detoxification pills, he'd be safe regardless. They crested the mountain and started down the far side, and along the way, Yi-Han picked a good number of mist peppers to stash in his resource column, thinking that if he ever put them up for sale, plenty of spice lovers would snap them up. Though he wasn't hurting for money and had no intention of selling them. The 2 mountains turned out to be connected, so partway down the first he could already start climbing the second, which struck him as likely to be the larger of the 2. Then Linger finally signaled that they'd arrived, and when he swept the searchlight forward, it lit up a glaring patch, shimmering with silver. An open-air secret star silver mine. The distance wasn't bad at all, he thought with satisfaction, reckoning that the round trip would cost him close to 1 detoxification pill, which he could easily spare, and he strode toward the ore. On the previous peak, the silver had been buried mostly inside the mountain itself, with the rabbit nest marking the point closest to the surface, and digging it out took considerable time. This open deposit was clearly the better spot to keep coming back to. The trouble was his 2-star pickaxe hadn't been through enlightenment yet and likely couldn't handle it without breaking, and he didn't want to risk chipping his machete's blade either. So lacking any proper tool, he turned to Linger again, asking whether the horn on its head could pry the ore loose and coaxing it to give it a try. Linger protested loudly. It liked fighting and eating meat, not being roped into odd jobs. But after enough pleading from Yi-Han, it gave in as it always did, driving its single horn straight into a large vein of silver ore, arching its body and wrenching until chunks of ore cracked free and scattered across the ground. Yi-Han whooped with delight and followed behind gathering it up. marveling at how the 3-star secret star silver was practically everywhere underfoot, though he grumbled at the resource column's 100-kilogram cap. With roughly 500 kilograms worth to collect, it would take at least 5 separate trips, and he couldn't help wishing he had unlimited storage. Just as he was about to fill the column to capacity, Linger let out a weak, faltering sound that made his heart lurch, and he immediately checked it over, paying special attention to the horn on its head. But it was untouched, without so much as a scratch, clearly the hardest part of its whole body. So he asked, gently, whether it simply had no strength left, whether it was hungry. Linger let out a grievance-filled cry and nodded, confirming that mining had drained a huge amount of energy. No wonder, since it had already eaten close to several hundred kilograms of meat since being born and was smack in the middle of a growth phase, all that food converting straight into growth. Yihan reflected guiltily that he really wasn't human, working a baby this hard, and fed it some meat until it recovered a little spirit, though it stayed somewhat listless. He wanted to carry it home but found he no longer had the strength. Linger now outweighed him. By the time they made it back to the shelter, the temperature had dropped and visibility had thinned, the searchlight only reaching 6 or 7 meters ahead in the gathering dark. But the bronze thorns parted to let them in, and Yihan sank down with relief before starting a fire to cook. Linger, meanwhile, was already gnawing on the giant python and giant bear meat stored in the house. And Yihan realized with a jolt that his meat supply wouldn't even last through tomorrow. He'd once worried about it spoiling and considered curing it into jerky. But with Linger around, that worry was moot. It ate through more than half his stock before finally perking back up, circling him with happy cries. He asked, stroking its head, whether there were any sizable mist beasts on that mountain, and after some back-and-forth head-shaking and nodding worked out that Linger simply didn't know. Though he reasoned there had to be something guarding a mountain that already held a 3-star giant bear, and resolved to send Linger hunting there the next day for another shot at a golden chest. That night he tried the bearskin as bedding, but the smell was unbearable, so he spread a woman's clothing on the wooden bed instead and slept holding Linger. He woke the next morning, the 4th day on the Mist Continent, refreshed despite the cold, warmed by the campfire and by Linger itself, which he'd now discovered doubled as an electric blanket, its body radiating heat. His 2 enlightenment chances had refreshed, and he committed them to the pickaxe and the searchlight. The pickaxe went from 2-star to 3-star, now able to mine 3-star ore, while the searchlight became 2-star, piercing the mist to 20 meters. Neither roll produced a critical hit, but Yihan wasn't bothered. Critical hits were always rare. He decided on fish soup for breakfast and sent Linger to the lake for lotus root and fish, grumbling about how the bronze thorns hadn't grown either, apparently just as ravenous and hard to feed. He wondered idly whether some blind mist beast might wander to the lake at night and deliver itself to his doorstep, but none did. At the lake, Linger gathered roots and fish and lit the cooking fire, though it sulked and demanded roasted meat with chili instead, further depleting his stock. Over the soup, Yihan checked the regional channel to see what the 2 swindlers were up to and caught them mid-conversation, boasting to each other about a big harvest. A golden chest from a joint kill that turned out to be, conveniently, another team card. Yihan nearly choked on his soup at how blatant the scam was, though he understood others might not see through it as easily, desperate as they were for someone to carry them. The channel exploded with people begging to join, the 2 swindlers promising to screen candidates, and a flood of increasingly outrageous offers followed. Until one message stood out. A survivor named Lai Hao, sharing a syllable with Kujihao's name, claimed he had no useful talent but did have a key that could open the 4-star ruins. That single line seized Yihan's full attention. 4-star ruins, requiring a key. Liu Xiao immediately asked for details, and the regional channel, already lively, surged even harder. The mention of a 4-star ruins key was enough to seize the attention of every survivor in the regional channel. Yihan stopped drinking his soup outright to watch the chat unfold. Lai Hao described it as a disc with raised patterns, said to open the 4-star ruins of the current region, though he admitted he didn't know where those ruins actually were. Only that he wanted to search, certain there'd be good loot inside, and begged the 2 big brothers to take him along in exchange for nothing more than food. Liu Xiao and Kujihao went quiet, apparently discussing it privately, and Yihan fell into thought of his own. If the ruins were tied to the current region, they were likely limited in number, maybe even singular, and getting the key was only step 1. Finding the ruins and surviving whatever lay inside was another matter entirely, not something an ordinary person could manage. He felt a stir of genuine desire for it himself. He considered himself firmly at the top of the survivor pyramid now, especially with Linger's help, and doubted anything on this stretch of mountains could stop him. Meanwhile, the channel filled with people offering to buy the key outright. Mist, coins, favors, even crude propositions, which Lai Hao brushed off, insisting the key was his lifeline and that he'd need to vet any romantic offer with photographs first. Yihan nearly spat out his soup again at the audacity, grateful that private messaging and image sharing weren't yet possible, or things would have gotten far stranger. Then Liu Xiao announced they'd chosen Lai Hao and sent an invitation, which Lai Hao gleefully accepted. And Yihan immediately understood the boy was doomed, comparing his situation to being lured into a trafficking scheme, with survival at best, meaning slavery and constant abuse. Sure enough, Lai Hao soon posted a suspicious string of overly cheerful messages about how well he was being treated, phrasing that struck Yihan as eerily familiar from news reports of coerced hostages. Reading the first word of each successive sentence, Yihan decoded the hidden plea, "I've been caught, save me." He found Lai Hao hard to categorize. Foolish enough to walk straight into the trap, yet clever enough to ask for verification photos beforehand and to signal for help afterward. The regional channel splintered between those trying to warn others and those mocking Lai Hao outright, some even praising Liu Xiao and Ku Jihao's cruelty. Then the two dropped the act entirely, confirming they'd scammed the key using a fake team card, and that Lai Hao had actually been beaten rather than fed, delighting a chorus of onlookers who cheered for the strong and jeered at the weak. Yihan, stroking Linger's head, murmured that he preferred dogs to people, then set off with Linger toward the open-pit mine, still craving that key, but with no way to track down two random scammers across a region that wasn't small. Better to focus on his own work. At the mine, he began breaking 3-star ore with his upgraded pickaxe while Linger hunted nearby, admonished repeatedly not to wander too far. By noon, he'd filled his inventory, and Linger returned from her hunt with a catch of her own. Yihan finished his morning's mining drenched in sweat, having taken several breaks to fill his inventory with 100 kilograms of secret star silver ore, meaning it would take 2.5 days total to gather the 500 kilograms needed for his shelter upgrade. As he stretched his aching arms, Linger returned, dragging a massive black-furred wild boar with fierce tusks, clearly proud of the catch, though the animal was still twitching. Yihan had it finish the kill and, before Linger could drink all the spilling blood, asked it to save some in a bottle for alchemy. Beast blood being a detoxification pill ingredient. A notification followed. Linger's kill counted as a 3-star mist beast, earning a golden chest on top of 2 silver chests already banked from a pair of 2-star kills that morning. Opening the silver chests first yielded a medical kit and a box of rifle ammunition. The golden chest gave 3 detoxification pills and a blueprint for crafting an oxygen tank. Yihan cataloged his haul with delight. The medical kit for emergencies, the ammunition useless without a matching weapon for now, and the detoxification pill, which he tried immediately, feeling a cooling, minty rush that left him lighter and clearer, convincing him it purged more than just mist toxin from the body. Best of all was the oxygen tank blueprint, checking the required materials. 2-star metal, plus beast tendon and hide he already had plenty of. He realized he could craft it easily, finally opening the door to investigating the underwater ruins he'd been so curious about, so long as Linger cleared the water of danger first. While butchering the boar, Yihan kept an eye on the regional channel, curious about Lai Hao's fate. He'd mostly avoided it while mining, treating it like reading a novel, and found little from Lai Hao himself. Mostly flattery aimed at the 2 bullies from others, hoping to join their exploitative operation. When someone asked why Lai Hao wasn't talking, Xiao Hao mockingly ordered him to bark, and Lai Hao complied. Woof, 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 shocking Yihan with how quickly he'd been broken. He even renamed himself, at their mockery, from Lai Hao to something meaning dog, drawing further cruel amusement from the channel. Someone asked whether the ruins had been located yet. Liu Xiao claimed no luck so far and offered rewards to anyone who could find them, even inviting listeners to dream along with him about ruling the continent. Yihan shook his head at their fantasies, certain that any genuinely powerful survivor wouldn't behave this way, and told Linger, who couldn't understand any of it, that he wished it could track the pair down for him. After a satisfying meal of roasted meat, Yihan realized he had a logistics problem. Between the boar meat and the ore, he had roughly 700 caddies of material but could only carry 200 at a time, meaning 3 or 4 exhausting trips back and forth for the rest of the afternoon. He started with the meat first, wary that scavengers might get to it if left too long. A lesson learned after birds had picked apart leftover python meat previously. Yihan packed 100 kilograms of boar meat and headed home with Linger, teasing it about growing up fast enough to carry cargo itself, wondering aloud whether a super mist beast ought to have built-in storage, or at least be willing to have goods strapped to its body. Linger's response, unintelligible as always, felt distinctly like cursing. The trip home went smoothly, and after 3 round trips, all the meat and some of the ore were safely stored in the shelter. Yihan marveled at how much stronger his body had become since arriving on the Mist Continent. The old him would have collapsed from this workload, though he decided against squeezing in another mining run since dusk would cut it too short to be worthwhile. Instead, he turned to hygiene, having gone almost the entire 4th day without a proper wash. He kept refreshing the trading post, hoping for soap or shampoo, finding nothing but an abundance of wood, and Linger nuzzled him affectionately despite the smell, retracting the barbs on its tongue before licking his face so as not to tear off his skin. Resigned to using his 1 bottle of laundry detergent, Yihan kept refreshing anyway and stumbled onto a wooden bathtub for sale. Pricey, but he could easily afford it and bought it without hesitation. Delighted, he had Linger handle the whole process, drawing lake water into a pot with its water control ability, boiling it in under a minute with its fire breath, then guiding the boiled water into the tub, the whole operation taking about 2 minutes, though filling the larger tub took closer to half an hour, by which time the water had cooled to a perfect temperature. Yihan sent Linger off to eat and sank into the bath with a contented sigh, steam rising around him and a pleasant fragrance released by the wood itself. Scrubbing revealed just how filthy he'd gotten. The water quickly turned murky, and he joked to himself about wishing Linger could give him a proper scrub. The laundry detergent barely lathered on his first pass through his oily hair, but worked well on the second, leaving him satisfied with the fragrance. By the time he was finished, the water was unusable, so he called Linger over to dump it and refill the tub, only for Linger to leap straight in itself, evidently annoyed at having missed its own turn while busy eating. Yihan scrubbed detergent onto its body too, which lathered easily, proving Linger's scales stayed remarkably clean on their own. It swam playful circles around him, splashing water everywhere, before finally getting to work, its whole body flashing with blue light as it expelled the dirty water from the house entirely and drew in clean water to repeat the boiling process. Yihan waded out of the tub this time to avoid being boiled alive, noticing as dusk fell that the temperature outside was dropping sharply and a howling wind had begun, the possible beginning of a mist storm. Yihan crouched by the campfire waiting for Linger to boil more water and checked both the world and regional channels, confirming the wind was blowing everywhere, not just at his location. Survivors across the continent were panicking about thatched cottages, shaking and speculating whether this was the precursor to a full mist storm, this being only the 4th day. On the regional channel, chatter mixed concern for Lai Hao with petty insults between users, plus a recurring mention of someone named Jiangfu, posting repeatedly on the world channel about looking for his mother. Yihan had already seen it twice himself, given how fast that channel refreshed. Liu Xiao mentioned that Lai Hao was tied up outside his house in the cold, and Ku Zhihao joked about building him a doghouse. Lai Hao begged pathetically to be let inside, framing it around still being useful as their dog. Disgusted, Yihan stopped reading, reasoning that Lai Hao's suffering was surely just one case among many that night. The death toll from other survivors likely wasn't small either. Linger's cry pulled him back to the present. The bathwater was ready. Yihan soaked for a full half-hour this time, savoring the contrast between the howling cold outside and the warm steam inside. Then washed his clothes in the same water before having Linger drain the tub and dry the clothes by pressing its body, now glowing with adjusted heat, against the fabric until the moisture evaporated. Delighted at discovering yet another use for Linger, a dryer this time, he grilled meat for both of them and fell asleep, hugging his living electric blanket, sleeping soundly through a night that left many others sleepless. He woke on the 5th day and used both of his day's enlightenment chances on the searchlight, pushing its range to 40 meters, joking to himself that he needed a machete just as long so an enemy could get a 39-meter head start. Heading out with Linger, he noted the wind had weakened compared to the night before but resolved to move quickly regardless, planning to finish the ore collection before investigating the underwater ruins site later. He skipped a proper breakfast, eating instant noodles with bread and leftover meat on the move. Along the way, he browsed both channels again. The World Channel was full of desperate messages about failing shelters and a poisoning case. Detoxification pills were now selling for a steep 100 mist coins each, out of reach for most. The regional channel remained fixated on Lai Hao's suffering, with Ku Zhihao reporting cheerfully that Lai Hao was gnawing on bones and thrilled about it, while Liu Xiao deflected questions about their supposed exploration progress with false modesty. Yihan scoffed inwardly. Anyone with real gains wouldn't advertise them, and told Linger, who still had no idea what he meant, that he wished he could run into the pair to claim that key. As they neared the open pit mine, the enhanced searchlight cutting a full 40 meters through the mist, Yihan suddenly heard voices ahead. Someone cursing at Lai Hao to dig faster. The name hit him like a jolt. Instantly, Linger straightened into a combat stance, and Yihan's eyes sharpened. He'd actually stumbled onto the gang he'd been hunting. For 2 days, Yihan had talked about wanting to run into this trio, never truly expecting the low probability chance to actually happen. Now that it had, he felt a rush of disbelief and pleasure. Linger tilted her head, silently asking whether she should kill on sight. A piercing voice demanded to know who was there, followed immediately by Lai Hao's desperate cries for help, describing how he'd been starved, beaten, and worked like an animal, before being violently silenced mid-sentence by a husky-voiced threat to pluck out his tongue. Recognizing the two voices as Liu Zhao and Ku Zhihao, Yihan skipped any pretense of conversation, instructing Linger in a lowered voice to kill two and spare the one currently screaming. Li Hao. He didn't want to give dangerous strangers any chance to reveal some unexpected talent. Better to strike first and decisively. Linger shot forward in a blur, a masked figure. Liu Zhao, wielding a sharp 2-star sword, swung at her on instinct but couldn't match her speed, and shouted for Ku Zhihao's help as terror set in. Ku Zhihao appeared behind him, throwing out his hands and roaring at Linger in what was clearly an attempt to use some control-type talent, but failed outright, crying that he couldn't control it, his legs shaking once he got a proper look at how formidable she was. Liu Zhao, hardening his resolve, hacked at Linger anyway, only to watch in disbelief as his prized blade failed to even chip a scale, the sword's own edge damaged instead. A moment later, Linger's jaws closed on his neck, tearing away a fatal chunk of flesh. He died on the spot. Yihan immediately ordered Linger to spit the meat back out, unwilling to let her eat human flesh, and she complied with visible disgust. Muttering sounds Yihan read as revulsion. Reasonable, he thought, since she'd grown up eating 3-star beast meat and Liu Zhao barely qualified as 1-star. He then ordered Linger to kill Xiahao as well. Watching his partner die had already broken Ku Zhihao's nerve, and he collapsed to the ground, begging for his life and throwing his belongings out as an offering, which struck Yihan as absurdly game-like. Before Linger could finish him off, though, Lai Hao, bruised, bloodied, missing patches of hair, appeared behind Ku Zhihao and smashed a chunk of ore into his temple. Ku Zhihao, badly wounded but not dead, retaliated by stabbing Lai Hao in the stomach and twisting the blade before Linger's jaws finally closed on his neck too, tearing away flesh and killing him. But not before he managed one last vicious slash across Lai Hao's belly with the last of his strength. Yihan rushed to check on Lai Hao and immediately saw, with a heavy sigh, that there was no saving him. Yihan looked down at Lai Hao's wounds and murmured that he hadn't needed to die. If he'd simply stayed hidden and let Linger finish Ku Zhihao off, he'd have lived. Yihan hadn't intended to play savior and take him along, but he wouldn't have let Liu Zhao and Ku Zhihao kill him either. Instead, Lai Hao's own attack had gotten him counter-killed. Bleeding from the mouth, Lai Hao managed to thank Yihan for killing those two beasts, then produced a hidden blueprint and offered it with his last strength. Yihan deduced that Lai Hao must have concealed it from his captor's inventory checks. His personal storage capped at 10 kilograms, easily exploited by having him try to stuff in items to test whether space remained. But a blueprint weighed next to nothing and had slipped through unnoticed. Yihan accepted it with thanks, and Lai Hao finally passed. Surveying the carnage, Yihan felt sick both physically and mentally and stepped away to recover before examining the blueprint. A pneumatic nail gun with a 50-meter effective range, genuinely valuable. He guessed Lai Hao had been secretly hoarding materials, hoping to eventually craft the weapon and turn the tables on his captors. A plan foiled by dying too soon through impatience. Checking his spoils further, Yihan found the 4-star ruins key had dropped as expected. A heavy cyan green disc with raised patterns, along with a 2-star gas mask taken from Liu Zhao, capable of filtering 30% of mist toxin and jumping to 40% after one round of enlightenment. A shop refresh card he'd seen before, and a scattering of low-value food, water, and materials. He then dealt with the bodies. Li Hao, too short for Yihan to reuse his clothes, was left with some dignity. Yihan closed his eyes and had Linger cremate him rather than bury him, reasoning that scavengers or mist beasts might disturb a grave. Liu Zhao and Ku Zhihao received no such courtesy. Yihan stripped them fully before having Linger burn them too, developing yet another use for her, crematorium. He packed Lai Hao's ashes into a water bottle as an improvised urn, apologized for the lack of a proper burial, and buried it, then had Linger wash away the other two men's remains with a spray of water, feeding Linger some boar meat and eating a piece of chocolate himself to lift his mood. Yihan decided to abandon mining for the moment and instead track down Liu Zhao and Ku Zhihao's shelter, reasoning their inventory limits meant most of their real supplies would be stored there. He asked Linger to follow the scent of the two men she'd killed, and she led him off. Meanwhile, back on the regional channel, People who had been eagerly awaiting news of Lai Hao's humiliation or hoping to join the bullies' operation found their messages going unanswered no matter what they tried. A growing suspicion taking hold that all three were now dead. Skepticism dominated the regional channel at first. Surely Lu Zhao and Ku Zhihao, who clearly had real strength, couldn't have simply died. Theories flew about Lai Hao somehow taking them down, or the pair running into a powerful mist beast, with some openly relieved at the possibility that such dangerous people were gone. Yi Han said nothing, keeping his role hidden, confident that within another day or two the prolonged silence would confirm the deaths for everyone. Following the scent trail, he found 2 adjacent level 2 shelters. The first was completely bare. No bed, no belongings at all, leaving him briefly baffled until he checked the second, which held 2 beds pushed together and plenty of supplies. He pieced together what must have happened. Lu Zhao and Ku Zhihao had met independently during their explorations and teamed up on the spot, meaning their shelters were never adjacent to begin with, while the empty room actually belonged to Lai Hao, who'd been forced to relocate next to Lu Zhao's after being captured via team card. Yi Han mused that stacking enough team cards together could theoretically let people build entire settlements, something he had no interest in doing himself, but suspected others eventually would. This pair had merely been an early, aborted example, snuffed out before it could grow. Rifling through the supplies, he found mostly low-value food, water, and materials, unimpressed until he checked the shop and found only trivial snack items refreshed for 2 days running. Frustrated, he used the shop refresh card, looted from Lu Zhao, and hit a jackpot. 3 mighty pills that could double strength for an hour with no side effects. A Yuzi blueprint fragment requiring 9 more pieces to complete, and a toothbrushing set he bought immediately, having gone without proper dental care for days. He noted that pill-type items, much like cards, seemed to be a rare, high-tier category. Sorting the room's materials by type, Yi Han realized Lu Zhao's stockpile was just enough to complete the pneumatic nail gun blueprint Lai Hao had given him. He crafted it on the spot. A heavy, solid weapon, and playfully aimed it at Linger, who scolded him and dodged, her instincts flagging it as dangerous. A test shot into the ground blew open a small crater, confirming its power. Through a series of yes or no questions, he confirmed with Linger that the weapon couldn't kill her outright but could hurt her, breaking scales and causing real damage, meaning it would make short work of 3-star beasts and any human target. With only 10 irreplaceable nails, he retrieved his test shot for reuse before pocketing the weapon and heading back out, mining still the priority for the day. Back at the open pit mine, Yi Han resumed mining while Linger hunted nearby, reflecting that with her around meat scarcity was never the issue. Quite the opposite. Noting the continued temperature drop, he considered trying a mighty pill just to test its effect but held off, wanting to save all 3 for a genuine emergency, especially since he had no way yet to craft more himself. He spent the rest of the 5th day mining and hauling, calculating that 1 more trip the next day would complete his 500-kilogram quota. That night, soaking in the bathtub, he shopped extensively for wood, water, and food to prepare for the coming storm, then skimmed both channels for anything useful. Amid routine chatter about shelter upgrades and monster encounters, one message caught his eye. Someone describing a strange door with a groove they couldn't open. Yi Han immediately connected it to the protrusion on his 4-star ruins key, though he suspected. Correctly, he guessed, that region-locked keys wouldn't open a door in a different region, and didn't bother responding on the world channel. On the regional channel, he found people now openly speculating and even falsely boasting about having killed Lu Zhao and Lai Hao themselves, which amused him without tempting him to correct the record. He went to sleep hugging Linger. The 6th day arrived with a clear plan. Finish the ore in the morning, then explore underwater in the afternoon, since tomorrow the mist storm was expected to hit. He spent his 2 enlightenment chances on the mask, pushing its toxin filtration to 50%, then set out with Linger, having her mine alongside him this time since hunting the previous day had turned up almost nothing. A sign the area's mist beasts were thinning out. By midday, they'd gathered the full 500 kilograms. Back at the shelter, Yi Han reviewed his freshly crafted items. A water purifier, a compound bow, and an oxygen tank. Plus shop purchases including a much-needed quilt for the coming cold. He then took Linger to the lake, had her clear out any danger in the water, and geared up with goggles and the oxygen tank to dive. The lake proved shallow and mostly harmless beyond some indifferent fish, one of which he casually caught and stored. Near the bottom, guided by the map's marker for the 4-star resource point, he was stunned to find an enormous ancient bronze gate overgrown with aquatic plants, a circular groove at its center lined with jagged patterns that matched his key perfectly. He pressed the key in, and the gate began to vibrate, sending ripples through the lake bed. The underwater resource point, it turned out, was the entrance to the 4-star ruins itself. The moment Yi-Han turned the key, the bronze gates swung open and a violent whirlpool formed, dragging him and Linger inside before he could react. Disoriented and losing all control of his body, he was saved only by Linger coiling around his waist to steady him as silt clouded his goggles completely. A sudden weightlessness told him he was falling with the current, and he plunged hard into water below. Clearly no longer the outside lake, but a body of water inside the ruins themselves, now swarming with palm-sized, scarlet, sharp-toothed fish bearing every sign of hostile intent. Yi-Han's scalp prickled with fear as he shouted for Linger, who, unable to vocalize underwater, instead lit up with a water-blue glow, using her control ability to throw the surrounding piranhas into disoriented chaos, giving Yi-Han the breathing room to survive. He realized with relief that without her, he'd have been stripped to bone in moments. He speculated grimly that earlier explorers must have entered these ruins before him and died inside, since no world announcement of a successful clear had ever appeared. With billions of survivors total, he doubted he was the very first to enter, but felt confident he'd be the first to actually clear it. Linger towed him toward visible land, the churning water behind them turning red as surviving piranhas tore apart their wounded kin in a frenzy. Safely ashore, Yi-Han caught his breath and checked his surroundings for danger while Linger, eager for a meal of her own, dried him off with her water ability before diving back in for what amounted to an all-you-can-eat buffet of ferocious fish. Yi-Han noted there was no mist at all inside the ruins and wondered, intrigued, whether other survivors might have chosen to remain trapped here permanently, given the mist-free environment and apparent resources. Scanning the terrain, lake ahead, land to either side and behind, a distant mountain peak in the rear. He guessed correctly that the peak held the key to clearing the ruins. A notification arrived confirming Linger had killed a 3-star Crimson Piranha King, earning a golden chest. And moments later, Linger surfaced with an oversized piranha the size of a scooter clenched in her jaws, biting nearly through its head. While she feasted, Yi-Han opened the chest and received a 3-star flame spar, an item type he'd never seen before, immediately making him wonder if the ruins produced different loot altogether. Checking the spar's description, Yi-Han learned it contained massive flame energy, valuable to any survivor with fire talent, which he lacked, but Linger possessed. He called her over and found her already fixated longingly on the spar, ignoring the half-eaten Piranha King corpse beside her. Confirming through nods that it was useful to her and meant to be eaten whole, he handed it over, and she swallowed it immediately, her body erupting in uncontrolled fire the moment after. Clearly overwhelmed by the spar's power, she curled into a ball, flames contracting but heat still radiating strongly enough to force Yi-Han back several steps. Realizing this might be an evolution in progress, Yi-Han settled in to wait, using the downtime to check his channels, only to find them completely blank, along with the trading post. He realized the ruins had no signal at all, explaining why he'd never seen any mention of them on the World Channel before. Anyone who entered was cut off from the outside entirely. 3 hours passed with Yi-Han standing guard, weapons ready, but no danger came. Finally, Linger stirred, her flames fully receded, her body now visibly thicker and longer, the horn on her head grown larger too. She rubbed affectionately against him, clearly pleased with herself. Yi-Han asked whether she'd broken through enough to fight a 4-star beast, a question with no real answer yet, since neither of them had encountered one. But he felt she likely could. She responded by spitting a fist-sized fireball into the lake, which detonated with enough force to blast a column of water skyward and soak Yi-Han completely. He judged the blast alone could one-shot most 3-star beasts. Thrilled, he led her toward the distant mountain, watching as they approached and details emerged. Stone steps rising to a peak where an altar stood, radiating a terrifying aura. Linger had already bared her teeth in anticipation. Certain a hard fight awaited at the summit, Yi-Han began the climb. Unbeknownst to him, outside the ruins, the sky over the mist continent had darkened dramatically, temperatures plunging below zero as violent winds tore across the land. Panic flooding the World Channel as thatched huts collapsed and even 2-star shelters shook under the strain. The mist storm had arrived in full force. On the 7th day since arriving on the mist continent, the full force of the mist storm descended, killing indiscriminately by the minute. Anyone still sheltering in a mere thatched hut was certainly dead, and even 2-star shelters offered no guarantee. Beasts driven mad by the storm collided with structures, boulders flew on the wind, and some shelters simply collapsed outright, burying survivors alive. The disaster spared no one, native creatures included. Yi-Han's own shelter faced the same assault, but its bronze thorns handled the threat effortlessly, devouring an entire 2-star mist beast that had crashed into range and earning him a silver chest via notification, even while he remained deep inside the 4-star ruins. Realizing the timing meant the storm had truly begun, Yi-Han paused his climb to study the peak ahead, where a massive brownish-red shape resolved into what was clearly a powerful mist beast, and a dazzling light beside it resembled a treasure chest. Linger, puzzled at his hesitation, waited as he considered his enlightenment options for the day. He used his first chance on the pneumatic nail gun, upgrading it to 3-star with reshaped, more lethal triangular nail heads, and his second on the machete, which landed a critical hit, jumping it to 4-star and granting a paralysis effect on anything it struck, with duration inversely tied to the target's strength. Delighted with both upgrades, he opened the silver chest from earlier and received a blueprint for a vigor pill recipe, filing it away for future use since he lacked the plant-based materials and beast blood it required, though he recalled seeing similar materials on the trading post before. Resuming the climb, the peak came into full view, a radiant treasure chest atop an altar, guarded by a giant bear Yi-Han judged to be the ruin's final boss. Almost certainly 4-star. He marveled at how deceptively simple the ruin's structure was, devoid of traps or mechanisms yet lethal at every turn. First, the piranhas, now this. He reasoned that while other survivors might eventually clear the ruins too, the combination of sufficient strength, the key, and the gate's location made him confident he was uniquely positioned for the world-first credit. Feeding Linger a vigor pill and swallowing one himself, Yi-Han watched the bear turn and roar a challenge. Linger charged first while he circled around to flank it. The bear's paw intercepted her attack outright, the first time anything had managed to block her, sending her flying, though she'd managed to wound the paw badly in the exchange. Recovering fast, she retaliated with a fireball that the bear swatted away, though the resulting burn blackened and split its paw open further. Yi-Han, encouraged, saw that Linger had taken the clear advantage in their opening clash. Yi-Han called out a warning not to get careless, just as the injured bear charged Linger with both front paws wounded. She answered with a triple burst of fireballs aimed at its head, neck, and belly. The bear managed to block 2 but not the third, which tore a massive hole through its abdomen and spilled its innards. Yi-Han shouted for her to burrow in and feast as she had before, confident the fight was essentially won, though he noted her stamina seemed to be running low. Spitting fireballs clearly cost her more than physical attacks, a limitation he attributed to her still being young. Just as the outcome seemed settled, the bear let out a furious roar and flushed scarlet, and Yi-Han tensed at the possibility of a death throes evolution, recalling a previous encounter with a wolf that had done exactly that. Sure enough, the bear surged with new speed and slammed Linger hard enough to actually damage her scales this time. Yi-Han judged it wasn't a true evolution, but something more like a berserk state, temporary but dangerous, and moved to help, firing a sneak attack nail into the back of the bear's skull, which sank in but failed to kill it. The bear turned on him instead. Forcing him to dodge a series of nail shots it managed to block before nearly crushing him underfoot. Only a desperate roll saved him from being flattened, the bear's stomping paws cratering the ground where he'd stood. Using the momentum of being thrown into the air, Yi-Han landed a solid slash on the bear's knee with his machete, the blade cutting clean through hide, flesh, and bone, the paralysis effect kicking in and visibly slowing the creature down. With Linger tearing into its belly and brain from inside, and the mighty pill still doubling his strength, Yi-Han kept slashing, severing its leg entirely at the knee and re-triggering the paralysis with every hit, effectively locking the bear in place while it slowly died from the inside out. Eventually his arms gave out just as the notification arrived. The 4-star mist beast was dead, yielding a diamond chest. And simultaneously, 2 world announcements went out, proclaiming Yi-Han the first to kill a 4-star beast and the first to clear the 4-star ruins, stunning every survivor watching the world channel, though Yi-Han himself remained cut off from any signal and unaware of the fanfare. Wiping the blood from his face, he confirmed the bear was truly dead and turned toward the altar ahead, where a second diamond chest awaited. Bringing his total from this excursion to 4, Yi-Han lined up all 4 diamond chests and opened them in succession, barely containing his excitement. The first produced a shelter upgrade card, exactly what he needed, guaranteeing him the reward for being first to reach a 3-star shelter once he got home. The second gave an AK-47 blueprint, thrilling him despite not yet having materials to craft it. The third produced 3 rare cards at once, a talent upgrade, a resource column expansion, and a fixed point relocation card. Items he'd only ever pulled once each from golden chests, despite opening many, confirming his suspicion that diamond chest leftovers outclassed golden chest jackpots. He used the first 2 immediately. His enlightenment talent jumped to level 3, granting 3 uses per day, and his resource column capacity expanded to a full ton. The 4th chest yielded 3 elemental crystals: ice, thunder, and flame. With the flame crystal being a duplicate he figured Linger could still benefit from. With the ruins fully cleared of anything valuable, Yihan checked on Linger, who poked her head out of the bear's carcass and flicked blood onto his face, visibly thicker than before. Clearly, the 4-star meat had accelerated her growth again, her girth now matching his entire body compared to her forearm thickness at birth. Pleased, he set about processing the bear, discovering its remaining weight still exceeded his ton capacity inventory even after being partially hollowed out by Linger's feeding and blood loss. He skinned it for a future carpet, deboned it, feeding chunks to Linger to crack open for marrow while saving a few pieces for himself, and packed the meat away, totaling 920 kilograms, mostly meant to sustain Linger through the coming storm. Heading toward the exit gate at the peak's altar, Yihan equipped his oxygen tank and goggles, and with Linger guiding him through violently churning current, made it back to open water, only to be hit immediately by the full force of the mist storm outside. The temperature felt like at least 20 below zero. Debris slammed into him from every direction. Water on his skin froze and shattered repeatedly, and he genuinely struggled to breathe, realizing that being caught fully exposed in this would kill a person within minutes. As he fumbled for his searchlight to get his bearings, he saw a large tree flying directly at him and thought bitterly that he should have just stayed inside the ruins, storm-free as they were. There was no time to dwell on regrets. Yihan had to survive and get back to his shelter. Linger coiled protectively around him at once, her body glowing red with warmth, and took the impact of a wind-flung tree meant for him, sliding backward across the ground from the force. Yihan called out anxiously, and though he couldn't understand her response, he urged her to keep moving toward home, trusting her completely since he had no other option. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to him, the World Channel had turned into a frenzy of speculation about him. People marveling over his back-to-back diamond chests, wildly theorizing about what the 4-star ruins even were, accusing him of cheating, and in one absurd case, someone even fabricated a threat against a mother Yihan didn't have, having grown up in an orphanage without ever knowing his birth parents. None of it reached him. He had no signal and no attention to spare, focused entirely on Linger's slow, difficult progress through the storm. At one point, a severed human leg, flung by the wind, struck Linger's head and impaled itself on her horn before shaking loose. Eventually, the shelter came into view, its bronze thorns catching and absorbing everything the storm hurled at it. Stone, debris, even what looked like fragments of flesh, possibly beast, possibly human. Linger carried him through the door, sealed it with her tail, and braced her body against it. Yihan collapsed inside, mentally reeling from having nearly died despite all his gear and power. Proof that, against a true natural disaster, none of it mattered much. Noticing his shelter shaking, he tried to upgrade immediately but was blocked. It needed repairs first, which he paid for with wood and stone materials before finally completing the upgrade using his 500 kilograms of ore and the shelter upgrade card. In a flash, his home transformed from wood and stone into a solid iron structure spanning roughly 100 square meters, the outside wind reduced to near silence. A New World announcement went out crediting him as the first to reach a 3-star shelter, rewarding him with yet another diamond chest, triggering fresh outrage and disbelief across the World Channel, some even joking about his name sounding Korean. Checking Linger over carefully for injuries and finding her unharmed, Yihan thanked her for saving his life yet again, then settled by the fire to roast bear meat while opening his 5th diamond chest with anticipation. The diamond chest produced a 4-star windbreaker, and Yihan was startled to read that it could resist fierce winds, crafted from advanced mist beast materials with a near-technological finish. Putting it on, he struck a proud pose for Linger's approval, finding it warm, light, and comfortable despite its leather-like texture. Impressive enough that he wondered whether he could move through the mist storm wearing it, though he ultimately decided against testing that theory given how much lethal debris the wind carried alongside its force. He roasted the bear's front paws, already partially cooked from Linger's fireball damage during the fight, filling the room with the smell of rendering fat. While cooking, he weighed how to spend his final enlightenment use of the day, and settled on the mask again, pushing its filtration to 60%. He then laid out the 2 remaining crystals, Frost and Thunder, for Linger, confirming through their now familiar yes/no exchange that she could safely eat and absorb both. The Frost crystal as a natural extension of her water control talent, and the Thunder crystal with some uncertain probability of success, a risk only her status as a super mist beast made viable at all. Linger, faced with an actual choice for once, hesitated comically before opting to eat the roasted bear paws first, tearing into them eagerly. Yihan tried to bite himself and was floored by how potent even 4-star meat was, his body heating instantly, followed swiftly by a nosebleed after a second bite. forcing him to hand the rest over to Linger and drink water to recover, feeling unexpectedly full from so little. Growing drowsy from the digestion, he told Linger he was turning in, suggesting she eat the flame crystal first since she'd already handled that type before, then fell asleep while she continued her meal undisturbed. Outside, the storm raged on through the night, tearing apart everything unfortunate enough to be exposed to it, while inside Yi-Han slept soundly, waking the next morning to find the first night of the mist storm had passed, feeling unusually energized. Yi-Han sat up, filled with an unfamiliar sense of physical power, throwing test punches and moving around the room to confirm his body had genuinely strengthened across the board. A cumulative effect, he reasoned, of steadily eating high-tier beast meat, capped off by the previous night's 4-star bear paw. Delighted, he joked to himself about not wanting to lag too far behind Linger, who lay curled in the center of the room, faint flames still flickering over her body, radiating enough warmth to keep the room comfortable, even with the campfire long extinguished. He noticed the flame crystal was gone from where he'd left it, confirming she'd eaten it as suggested, and figured the timing was about right to check her progress. While brushing his teeth, he skimmed the world channel. A mix of despair from survivors running out of repair materials, cautious optimism that the storm's winds seemed to be weakening, and repeated jabs at Jiangfu for his ongoing, unanswered search for his mother. Until one message stopped him cold. Someone addressing him directly, saying they'd sent him a team invitation. Checking his panel, Yi-Han found a queue of invitations, starting with a survivor named Sun Wu, whom he didn't recognize. Reasoning that his public notoriety from the world announcements had made his id widely known and an appealing target for anyone hoping to ride his coattails, he rejected it outright, then rejected a string of others from strangers with a mix of nationalities, including one he mockingly cursed at for good measure. He noted one invitation, from someone named Wang Qi, had already expired and gone gray, meaning that survivor had likely died overnight before Yi-Han even had the chance to respond. Turning to the regional channel, he found the conversation had moved entirely past Liu Zhao and his group, their continued silence now taken as confirmed proof of death, replaced by survivors calling out numbers in a grim roll call, with several numbers conspicuously missing, presumably among the storm's casualties. Chatter followed about the rising death toll, resigned fatalism, and a jealous survivor threatening, half in jest, to hunt Yi-Han down for supposedly cheating his way to success. Yi-Han closed the channel, shaking his head at how envy twisted people's reactions, quietly proud of being the current sole owner of a 3-star shelter. Linger stirred and nuzzled affectionately against him, and he asked how far her flame ability had progressed. In response, she stepped back and ignited fully, breathing a straight, focused stream of fire. A marked improvement over her previous flickering output, now closer to a proper flamethrower than a weak lighter. Pleased, Yi-Han considered having her eat the ice crystal next, but reconsidered, worried that emitting cold might make him miserable given how weak he felt his own constitution to be. Linger confirmed through gestures that she wouldn't release cold air if she ate it, easing his concern. He affectionately urged her to eat first as always, and she consumed the ice crystal without incident, emitting no cold as promised. Likely, Yi-Han guessed, because her evolved fire ability let her better regulate whatever energy she absorbed. With nothing else pressing, he settled into passing the time, browsing the world channel and refreshing the trading post. And it wasn't long before something caught his eye there. Yi-Han had gotten into the habit of checking the trading post constantly, occasionally buying small snacks. Chocolate from the mist shop, plus melon seeds and chips that had come from Liu Zhao's leftover stash, items other survivors could just as easily stumble on themselves through the shop or treasure chests. This time he spotted a red dot sight, precise enough to guarantee a hit wherever aimed, priced at 888 mist coins. Exactly the kind of thing he needed, since he had an AK blueprint and a partial Uzi blueprint but zero actual marksmanship. He tried to buy it immediately, but it vanished before he could. Someone else had beaten him to it, or the seller had pulled the listing, and he cursed his own slowness. Refreshing further, he noticed the trading post's variety had exploded. Furniture like an old wall lamp, wardrobe, and recliner, plus tools like knives, axes, and crowbars now for sale. Clear signs that desperate survivors were unloading things they'd normally keep. He bought the wardrobe and recliner, skipping the lamp since his searchlight covered lighting. He noted grimly that with all 1-star shelters wiped out and everyone else stuck at 2-star, wood and stone prices had spiked as people scrambled to keep their shelters repaired, forcing many to sell off even their weapons just to survive. Then he spotted a UZ blueprint fragment for 300 coins, pricier than the mist shop's own rate, but he bought it anyway, bringing his total to 2 of 10 needed. Interspersed with his shopping, the narrative cut to other survivors' desperation. a middle-aged man selling his last valuable blueprint fragment just to afford shelter repairs. A grieving mother burning through her last coins while deceiving herself that her missing child might still be found. And a self-proclaimed influencer railing uselessly against a system where her old fame meant nothing. Back with Yi-Han, he lounged in his new recliner cracking melon seeds and sipping fragrant tea. Amused to find a stray shell freeze solid on contact with Linger's unnaturally cold body. Sparking a new game where he petulantly pelted her with shells while she remained oblivious, still deep in her evolution trance. Then, scanning the trading post again, he spotted something remarkable. A pistol he recognized as the one previously listed as a half-joking flex at 1 million missed coins, now slashed to 10,000. A telltale sign its owner was in serious trouble, though still far too expensive for anyone to actually buy given how tight money was for shelter repairs. Sure enough, it went unsold, drawing mockery on the World Channel, then vanished. Pulled by the seller, Yi-Han guessed. Soon after it reappeared, even cheaper, at 8,000, alongside a returning listing for the Red Dot site now priced at 666. Yi-Han quickly bought the Red Dot site at its lowered 666 coin price, guessing correctly that the same seller had simply relisted it rather than someone else snapping it up. The pattern of the pricing gave it away. Satisfied, he turned his attention fully to the pistol, determined to watch it drop as low as possible before buying. Confident no one else in his situation would dare spend big on a gun when shelter repairs were a constant drain. The narrative shifted to the site's actual owner, a curly-haired young man who regretted listing it so low, having only done so out of desperation after his shelter took more damage. And to the pistol's owner, a foul-mouthed bald man with a devil tattoo, the same person who'd originally hung the gun for 1 million coins purely to show off. Now genuinely desperate as his shelter crumbled around him, he dropped the price again and again. 5,000. Then watched in mounting panic as still nobody bought it, cursing everyone who refused, praying, even offering to treat a buyer like his own father. Yi-Han, meanwhile, sat comfortably in his recliner, tracking the price drop by drop, reasoning that only he, with his unique 3-star shelter, could afford to spend freely without fear of the storm. While everyone else with money to spare stayed anxiously cautious, hoarding coins for repairs. As the bald man's shelter took a direct hit from wind-flung debris and began visibly collapsing, he panicked further, slashing the price all the way down to 1,000 in one desperate move. And Yi-Han, who'd been waiting exactly for this, snapped it up instantly. The moment the sale went through, the bald man's fury flipped instantly from gratitude to murderous rage at whoever had bought his prized possession for so little, cursing them viciously even as he raced to spend the proceeds on repair materials. But it was too late. His shelter collapsed completely before he could finish, and a notification informed him he no longer had a shelter to repair at all. With no shelter left to protect him, the bald man was swept into a tornado, his body battered and pierced by flying debris until he died completely, unnoticed by anyone. Meanwhile, Yi-Han examined his new pistol, a Desert Eagle, chambered in .50 caliber with a 7-round magazine. Noting that his enhanced physical strength made the weapon's weight and recoil trivial to handle, he mounted the Red Dot sight and idly aimed it at Linger's head, joking to himself about whether she'd chase the dot like a cat before catching himself. She was a dragon-like creature, not a cat. Linger stirred awake right as he was aiming, and for one heart-stopping moment charged straight at him horn first before veering off to nuzzle and lick his face affectionately instead, tickling him. Amused and relieved, Yi-Han stroked her, only to feel a handful of melon seed shells still stuck to her scales, which she noticed with visible confusion, having been oblivious the whole time. Brushing it off, he asked her to demonstrate her ice ability, and she obliged with a burst of cold that dropped the room's temperature sharply, extinguished the campfire outright, and turned ambient moisture into falling ice crystals. Yi-Han shivering hard despite his warm coat. She then spat out an actual icicle that grazed his scalp and struck the wall hard enough to shake the whole shelter, alarming the bronze thorns outside into a defensive frenzy. He quickly told her to stop, and she complied, warming the room back up and relighting the fire. Inspecting the wall, he found a small crater from the icicle strike and patched it with spare ore, joking that she'd started demolishing the house herself. Before letting her attempt the thunder crystal, he fed her bare meat, worried after his own earlier nosebleed from eating 4-star meat. But this time, he suffered no ill effects at all, a sign his own body had grown strong enough to handle it. The two ate a satisfying meal together, after which Linger eagerly swallowed the thunder crystal and curled up to begin absorbing it, faint purple arcs visible beneath her scales, safely contained. While waiting, Yi-Han checked the regional channel, where survivors were doing periodic head counts to track who remained alive, a practice he found grimly counterproductive. likely worsening morale or even pushing some towards suicide as the missing numbers piled up, including a couple of names he recognized from earlier events. On the World Channel, chatter had shifted almost entirely to speculation about who'd bought the mysterious pistol, with a notable few also fixated on Yi-Han directly, including one message from a survivor requesting to buy his 4-star mist beast meat, which caught his attention. Yi-Han recognized the buyer's name, Lang Feng, as the first survivor to reach a 2-star shelter per an earlier world announcement. Clearly another powerhouse, and one Yi-Han suspected wanted the meat for its physical enhancement effects rather than mere appetite. He decided against selling for now, unsure how long the storm would last and unwilling to risk running short on food himself. Scanning the World Channel further turned up little of substance. Most survivors who'd made it this far were savvy enough to keep their real assets hidden except in emergencies, a policy Yi-Han followed just as strictly himself, never once revealing anything about Linger or his own talent publicly. He turned to hunting for 50 caliber ammunition on the trading post, wary of running his 7 rounds dry with no way to restock otherwise. A box of overpriced 5.56 rounds came up, and he dismissed it as a scam target for desperate buyers, then found another Uzi fragment. Pricier than his last purchase, but still worth buying, bringing his collection closer to complete. He mused idly that whatever cosmic force had brought humanity here must have once designed games, given how familiar the mechanics felt. Failing to find the bullets he wanted, he settled for smaller purchases. A sturdy 4-legged table and a roll of toilet paper, the latter solving a practical problem he'd been quietly dealing with by using a corner of his spacious shelter rather than risk the storm outside. Just then, Linger opened her eyes early. Too early. And Yi-Han's stomach dropped, sensing bad news before she even confirmed it. Her attempt had failed, and she was crying, burying her face against him in genuine distress. He comforted her gently, downplaying his own disappointment and reassuring her the failure meant nothing about her worth, then cleverly redirected her attention by having her freeze away the waste he'd left earlier. A task she performed with a mix of visible distaste and efficiency, having apparently peeked at it earlier despite him telling her not to look, still visibly deflated afterward. Yi-Han promised to keep buying replacement crystals until she eventually succeeded, and began refreshing the trading post in search of another one as night approached and the storm outside intensified further, showing no sign of easing. As night fell without any sign of the storm relenting, despair deepened across the World Channel. People venting exhausted coin reserves, raging against their unknown captors, or grimly resolving to survive on willpower alone. Yi-Han sighed at the pattern. Certain more deaths were coming, and noted the regional channel's headcounts thinning further under a spreading atmosphere of doom. Turning to his own progress, he used all 3 of his fresh Midnight Enlightenment chances on the gas mask, pushing its filtration to 90% and landing a critical hit that added a bonus fragrant attribute, keeping his breath fresh. A small but satisfying upgrade, given how masks normally accumulated odor over time. Rather than sleep immediately, he stayed up refreshing the trading post, reasoning that storm damage overnight would push more people into selling valuable hoarded items. Since Linger had grown too heavy for the bed, she coiled beside it instead, still radiating warmth, and even purred a low, soothing hum Yi-Han nicknamed Dragon Roar. Yet another use for her, this time as a white noise machine that lulled him to sleep without him even noticing the transition. Waking refreshed, he immediately checked the post and found real variety had accumulated overnight. A box of the 50 caliber bullets he'd wanted, a 5th Uzi fragment, and a mattress, which he bought and installed at once. This spending left him nearly broke, prompting him to list his stockpiled 2-star stone, now in high demand for shelter repairs, which sold out almost instantly, restoring his coin reserves substantially despite selling cheaper than he'd have liked. After breakfast, continued refreshing, finally turned up a 3-star thunder crystal for 1,000 coins, which he bought immediately and presented to an ecstatic Linger, who nuzzled him affectionately before swallowing it and settling in to try again. While Linger absorbed the new crystal, Yi-Han kept browsing the trading post, and the narrative briefly followed the crystal's original seller, a thin, dark-skinned young man who used the proceeds to repair his own crumbling shelter just in time, admitting with regret that he'd meant to keep the crystal for himself, but had no choice given the circumstances. The World Channel remained flooded with desperation. Pleased to team up, complaints about being unable to afford good items on the trading post, accusations that Yi-Han might secretly be a non-player administrator given his total silence, a stray craving for spicy food from someone facing death, and a wave of suicidal messages after one person set the grim trend. Yi-Han dismissed much of it as unreliable, reasoning that plenty of people who were doing fine, himself included, simply chose to stay quiet, meaning the visible despair wasn't necessarily representative of everyone's situation. By afternoon, having rejected further team invitations and picked up a fifth Uzi fragment, Yi-Han heard Linger's excited cry. She'd succeeded this time, her body crackling with visible purple electricity. Thrilled, he asked her to demonstrate. But the buildup of arcing current on her horn alarmed him enough to stop her immediately. Wary of the metal shelter conducting electricity dangerously, he carefully explained safety precautions. Never using the ability near water or in rain, for instance, which she absorbed and promised to remember. The two settled into a meal, Yi-Han supplementing with a paste made from compressed biscuits, growing restless from days cooped up indoors but unwilling to risk going out despite his windbreaker. Then a violent commotion erupted outside, croaking, ground-shaking impacts against the shelter itself, and Yi-Han and Linger both readied for combat. Investigating, he found an enormous frog-like mist beast, evidently blown in by the storm's winds. Already grievously wounded and entangled by the shelter's defensive bronze thorns but still thrashing dangerously. Yi-Han ordered Linger to shock it while he moved in with his blade, and she darted out with lightning crackling from her horn, striking clean through the creature's body and sending it into smoking agony. The frog thrashed harder under the electric shock, snapping some of the restraining bronze thorns, but Yi-Han's machete found its leg regardless, opening a deep wound with an added paralyzing effect that combined with Linger's lightning to lock the creature rigid. Encouraged, Yi-Han ordered her to burrow in and feast while maintaining the shock, and she complied eagerly, streaking across the frog's body like a living lightning bolt before diving straight into its mouth, terrifying it further as internal cold began spreading from her ice ability too, a triple-layered lock of paralysis, shock, and frost that left the creature utterly helpless. The bronze thorns closed in as well, draining it steadily, until a notification confirmed the kill. A 4-star mist beast, far stronger than Yi-Han had initially assumed given how easily it had gone down. A result he attributed to the creature's already weakened storm-battered state plus Linger's substantially improved combat power. He called off the overeager bronze thorns before they consumed too much of the corpse, reflecting idly on the plant creature's simple but genuine intelligence. Comparable, he guessed, to a very young child. Well below Linger's own teenage equivalent understanding. Checking in with Linger, who wasn't yet full, he let her keep feeding while he began butchering the legs himself. She returned shortly after with an unexpected find. A large spiked fish, nearly his own size, that had apparently been swallowed whole by the frog. When Yi-Han struck its head off with his blade, no kill notification appeared, tipping him off that it wasn't actually dead yet. Fish being notoriously resilient, so he set it aside to finish dying while he continued processing the frog, storing roughly 600 kilograms of meat despite the punishing wind now that the frog's bulk no longer blocked it. With Linger's help hauling him and the fish back inside, they made it home safely, celebrating the unexpected bounty of a 4-star kill and a fresh diamond chest, which, upon opening, produced a rare purple-colored blueprint unlike anything he'd seen before, a design for grenades. Yi-Han worked out that blueprints came in tiers by color. Green ones, like the detoxification pill recipe, required him to craft manually following listed steps. Blue ones, like the oxygen tank or water purifier, consumed themselves automatically once materials were supplied, and this new purple grenade blueprint turned out to be permanently reusable, never consumed no matter how many times he crafted from it. A genuinely rare and valuable find that could have made an ordinary survivor rich through steady production. Though Yi-Han's ambitions lay elsewhere, focused purely on staying at the top tier of survivors. A notification then confirmed the spiked fish had finally died, revealing itself as a 3-star mist beast in its own right. Explaining, Yi-Han realized with amusement why the frog had been in such rough shape to begin with. Having swallowed a fish that refused to die and thrashed inside its stomach the whole time, one more factor contributing to its downfall alongside the storm, the fish itself, Yi-Han, Linger, and the bronze thorns. The resulting golden chest yielded a 3-star crystal stone, which he happily fed to an eager Linger, boosting her water control ability further. Turning to the fish itself, curious how it tasted, Yi-Han cut it open to clean it and was startled to find something else lodged inside its belly. A white jade fragment engraved with ancient-looking patterns, identified as a piece of a 5-star ruins key, meaning multiple fragments would need to be collected to unlock whatever lay beyond, a considerably steeper challenge than before. Deciding the concern was premature, given the ongoing storm, he set the fragment aside and turned to cooking, making a large pot of soup from the fish, some frog meat, instant noodles, and a duck egg. Delighted to find the fish nearly boneless save for a few thick, easy-to-avoid bones, and thoroughly satisfying to eat. After a hearty meal, Yi Han settled onto his newly comfortable mattress and skimmed the world channel, filled with mundane complaints, a plea for fever medicine, someone hawking detoxification pills, and one more threatening message from a spurned party invite sender. Then checked the regional channel, noting the dwindling headcount as more people quietly died. He guessed the storm might run anywhere from 3 to 7 days total, leaning toward the higher estimate before drifting off to sleep. He woke on the third day of the storm to the sound of rain, then spent his morning enlightenment chances. The first completing his mask's toxin filtration at a perfect 100%, maxing out its potential entirely, and the remaining 2 on his pistol, which jumped first to 4-star, then to 5-star with a critical hit. The critical hit on the pistol revealed a devastating new special attribute: bullets that burst on impact for secondary damage and ignited white phosphorus, a substance so dangerous it was banned in real-world warfare for burning even underwater. Yi Han marveled at how the modest-looking pistol had effectively become his most powerful ranged weapon, surpassing even the pneumatic nail gun, and itched to test it in combat. Though no opportunity presented itself, despite waiting half the day, the earlier frog incident having clearly been a rare stroke of luck rather than something repeatable on demand. By noon, he'd cooked another meal and noticed Linger still hadn't woken from her latest crystal absorption, longer than the process should normally take for a mere water attribute spar. After confirming nothing seemed wrong, he relaxed and passed time browsing the channels and trading post, checking on her periodically. Gradually, he noticed her body beginning to grow larger, and guessed correctly that she was on the verge of a stage evolution, not a tier change, since she was already a super mist beast, but a shift from infancy into the next growth stage, the natural result of all the high-tier meat and multiple spars she'd consumed. By nightfall, she finally stirred, now visibly 1.5 times Yi Han's size, her body too long to fully stretch out even in his spacious 100-square-meter shelter. She nuzzled him playfully, nearly pushing him into a wall with the sheer force of her affection, prompting him to worry aloud about how they'd manage if she kept growing to the point of being unable to fit through the door, a concern she immediately addressed by shrinking herself down to finger thickness in an instant. Delighted but wary, Yi Han declined to let her climb onto his hand, reasoning that her weight likely hadn't changed despite the size shift, meaning even her miniature form could crush him. He fed her frog meat, per her seemingly bottomless appetite, while the world channel churned with mounting despair, suicidal messages, and continued cursing directed at him for ignoring team invitations. That night proved the harshest yet, but by the following noon conditions began easing. Yi Han and Linger both sensing the storm's decline, and he used his day's enlightenment on the machete, windbreaker, and body armor, pushing them to 5-star, 5-star, and 3-star respectively. As the storm continued weakening on its 5th day, brave survivors began venturing outside again, and Yi Han, protected by his upgraded windbreaker, considered doing the same. The mist shop offered nothing useful that morning, but his enlightenment rolls proved excellent. The machete and pistol both reached a formidable 6 stars, with the machete landing a critical hit that granted it Blade Aura, letting a swing project, a ranged slash carrying half the weapon's power, transforming his melee weapon into something with genuine reach for the first time. Testing it outside thrilled him, the Blade Aura splitting the mist roughly 10 meters ahead. Riding Linger at full size like a mount, he surveyed the storm's aftermath. The lake shrunk to a muddy pond, his fluorescent fruit tree snapped down to a stub, and the nearby mountain stripped bare. He had her tear into the mountainside to expose buried ore, then used her horn to unearth vast quantities efficiently, filling his inventory to its full ton capacity in short order. A stark contrast to his earlier days of manual pickaxe labor, prompting him to add automatic mining machine to her growing list of uses. The pair spent the rest of the day emptying the mountain entirely, forcing him to stockpile surplus ore outside since his shelter could no longer contain it all. Over the following days, the storm continued fading, survivors gradually regaining hope and venturing further, until on the full 7th day it finally ended completely, met with a mix of relief, tears, and celebration across the world channel. By this point, Yi Han had pushed both his machete and pistol to an extraordinary 8 stars, his body armor to 6, making him almost certainly unmatched across the entire continent. Just as the wind fully died down, a new system message appeared, declaring that the novice protection period, which had apparently included the entire mist storm, was now over, and the real challenges of the mist continent were only beginning. A revelation that chilled many survivors who'd assumed surviving the storm meant the worst was behind them. Simultaneously, the mist across the continent thickened and darkened, plant life surged, and previously weak creatures began evolving under its intensified influence. Yi Han absorbed the news with a chill, reasoning grimly that the mist storm must have functioned as a filter, meaning only those who survived it were truly qualified for what came next, and wondered how much of the world's 8 billion people remained, guessing perhaps half or less. Additional prompts followed. A friend system and free trading feature had both been unlocked. The World Channel exploded with reactions, ranging from despair over the revelation to practical enthusiasm about the new social and trading tools. Checking his own notifications, Yi Han found himself flooded with friend requests. Unsurprising given his repeated world announcements and status as the sole 3-star shelter owner. He filtered out all foreign requests without hesitation, admitting to a personal dislike of dealing with non-Chinese survivors, then began scrolling through the remaining flood, mostly ignoring it until he spotted a familiar name. Leng Feng, the survivor who'd earlier expressed interest in buying his 4-star meat and who held the distinction of being first to a 2-star shelter. Yi Han accepted the request, and Leng Feng immediately introduced himself with characteristic bravado as a Special Forces veteran, offering mist coins or barter for the meat and touting his own combat strength and a spare team card as leverage. Yi Han, unimpressed by the posturing but interested in trading, proposed a barter and asked directly whether Leng Feng had anything related to 5-star ruins. A question that stunned onlookers on the channel, given that everyone else was still stuck at 2-star shelters. Leng Feng had nothing of that caliber, but offered a 3-star thunder crystal, 3 Uzi blueprint fragments, and, most valuably, a 4-star ruins key. Yi Han demanded all 3 items outright. Leng Feng balked at handing over the key without at least an invitation to explore the ruins together later, but ultimately caved to Yi Han's blunt terms, agreeing to hand it over immediately in exchange for a promise that Yi Han would carry him if he later located the ruins himself. The trade proceeded through the game's secure double confirmation system, and Yi Han received all 3 items in exchange for a modest 20 kilograms of bear meat and 10 kilograms of frog meat, deliberately revealing that he'd killed 2 separate 4-star beasts. A fact that visibly shook Leng Feng, reinforcing Yi Han's dominant position in the relationship. Feeding the thunder crystal to Linger immediately, and bringing his Uzi fragment count to 9 of 10, Yi Han wrapped up the exchange amicably, with Leng Feng promising to scout for the actual 4-star ruins location the next day, while Linger digested her newly acquired thunder crystal, further boosting her lightning ability. Yi Han reflected on how comparatively relaxed his own experience of the mist storm had been compared to the sheer terror most survivors described. His combat and defensive gear having climbed steadily through repeated enlightenment the whole time. Refreshing the trading post, he finally found and bought the last Uzi blueprint fragment needed, completing the set and noting that its required materials were all 3-star grade, far more attainable than the 4-star materials the act demanded, some of which he could get via enlightenment. But one component, a mysterious polymer coating, remained completely unobtainable through any means he'd found, leading him to guess it was Diamond Chest exclusive or required its own separate blueprint. He crafted the Uzi on the spot, consuming the one-time blueprint, then immediately spent 3 enlightenment charges on it, pushing it to 6 stars. No critical hit this time, but pleasantly its magazine capacity grew with each upgrade, unlike the pistol's enlightenment pattern. After stocking up on appropriate ammunition, he browsed the World Channel briefly, and found himself the target of a fresh wave of hostility. Furious messages from survivors he'd ignored or rejected, now doubly resentful since the new friend system meant nearly everyone had tried adding him and been denied, save for Leng Feng. Amused but unbothered, he closed the channel and went to sleep. Waking to find Linger had finished absorbing the crystal and was watching over him. He took her outside to test her progress and discovered the mist had grown noticeably thicker post-storm, confirming that the earlier density had merely been a novice period baseline. His detoxification pills now lasted only half as long as before, though his maxed-out mask remained unaffected, and his searchlight's range had also been halved. He resolved to spend the next day's enlightenment on the searchlight to compensate. Riding Linger to the now-replenished lake, he watched her casually blast a returning 3-star alligator dead with a lightning bolt. Evidence, he guessed, that isolated creatures had survived the storm in hidden pockets and rapidly regrown under the thickening mist, or perhaps simply respawned the way a game might handle it. The resulting golden chest yielded a detoxification pill recipe blueprint, letting him finally craft his own supply. After a hearty meal, Yi Han was preparing to head toward the mine when a message notification arrived from Leng Feng, along with a temporary team invitation, which Yi Han assumed meant the 4-star ruins had been found. Instead, the message read only, "Save me, Yi Han." A shocking reversal from the confident, battle-hardened persona Leng Feng had projected just the day before. The day before, after Yi Han added Leng Feng as a friend, Lang Feng had been arrogant about it, boasting that he was incredibly strong and telling Yi Han to call on him if he ever ran into danger, and Yi Han had played along in the same posturing spirit, promising that if Lang Feng ever found the 4-star ruins, he'd come carry him out himself. Both of them putting on airs of being experts. But Lang Feng's bravado collapsed almost immediately. Before Yi Han could even reply, message after frantic message came through, Lang Feng begging him to join a team and save him, saying he'd found the 4-star ruins but had been ambushed and captured, and that his captors were now torturing him by forcing him onto an electric chair. Reading this, Yi Han's expression turned complicated. An electric chair? Seriously. And the word "they" put him on alert, suggesting more than one enemy. Something like the gang of Lu Zhao and Ku Zhaihao. He demanded details. How many attackers? How strong were they? Lang Feng answered that there were 3, that they weren't especially powerful, that they'd only caught him by ambush, and that the leader was a man from Sakura country who could discharge electricity, while the other 2 were Huxia traders who'd defected to the Sakura side and weren't much of a threat either. The moment Yi Han saw a person from Sakura country, something lit up in him, patriotic fire, and he agreed instantly, accepting the team invitation without hesitation. The system explained that the temporary team would last 24 hours and could be dissolved at any time, and then asked whether he wanted to bring his mist beast along. Of course he did. Linger went everywhere with him. She was practically his own daughter. In an instant, he and Linger vanished from where they stood and reappeared riding atop her head in an unfamiliar area, where he immediately heard furious cursing followed by a burst of agonized screaming and the crackle of electric current. So Lang Feng really had ended up on that chair. A clumsy, foreign-accented voice was demanding Lang Feng hand over the key to the 4-star ruins, warning him to surrender and spare himself further pain. Clearly the man from Sakura country, and Yi Han briefly felt like he'd wandered into an old anti-Japanese war drama. Lang Feng refused to talk, and the Sakura man, angered that this Huxia captive wouldn't break the way his 2 kneeling, already surrendered underlings had, ordered Boss Sato, as his men called him, to electrocute Lang Feng to death, while one underling mocked Lang Feng for talking big in the regional chat about being some king of soldiers, sneering that he must have read too many trashy novels. It was at that point that one of the underlings noticed something wrong. In the mist, just behind Lang Feng, an enormous, blurry shape had appeared out of nowhere. Because of the mist, they could only make out a small part of it, unable to tell what it actually was, and when the underling shouted for Sato to look, Sato squinted at it, puzzled and suddenly uneasy, his instincts screaming that something was off. And true to the old saying that trouble follows the abnormal, he turned to retreat. Too late. A beam of light dropped from above like a stage spotlight, fixing on Sato alone, and a red targeting dot appeared right on his head. An underling's voice cracked in terror as he screamed the warning, and a chill shot through Sato's body. He tried to bolt, but a gunshot rang out first, striking him directly in the head and triggering the Desert Eagle's special deflagration effect. His head burst apart like a watermelon, leaving a headless body with the neck still aflame, blood fountaining up but unable to douse the white phosphorus fire. A system prompt announced the loot dropped from killing Sato, but Yi Han ignored it, instead swinging the searchlight's beam onto one of the traitorous underlings, a middle-aged man who looked meek and honest but was, in truth, spineless. The man dropped to his knees at once, begging for his life, kowtowing over and over and wetting himself from fear. Yi Han said nothing, simply raising his gun, until Linger let out an impatient cry, eager to get in on the action herself. Laughing, Yi Han rubbed her head and told her to go ahead and electrocute him too. The man had no idea whose strange cry that even was. And before he could process the threat of yet another lightning user, Linger unleashed a bolt from her mouth like divine thunder, engulfing him in purple lightning. He screamed briefly before falling silent, collapsing charred and smoking, dead on the spot. Another item drop prompt followed. Only the last man remained, already crawling away in panic. But it made no difference. Yi Han had Linger scoop him up and give chase, asking her to drop altitude so he could test out the strike of his blade aura. Cooperative as ever, Linger closed the distance while descending to just the right angle for him to strike. In the searchlight's glow, Yi Han saw the traitor had gone weak-legged with terror, collapsed on the ground, and soiling himself as he twisted around to look back at Yi Han and Linger, remarking with satisfaction that the man's shifty, treacherous face matched exactly his idea of what a traitor should look like. Yi Han swung his blade. A white arc of blade energy sliced through the mist and cut clean through the man's body, splitting him in half in a single stroke. The stench of blood and burning flesh filled the air. In under a minute, all 3 men were dead. Yihan sighed that his opponents had been far too weak to be any fun, boasting that even a 5-star or 6-star mist beast wouldn't pose him any trouble right now. Then turned back to find Lang Feng frozen stiff with shock. And what really caught his eye was that Lang Feng was, indeed, sitting on an actual electric chair. Lang Feng looked pitiful, stripped down to his underwear and bound to a metal electric chair with iron chains. These Sakura country people really did have a talent for cruelty, building torture equipment out of their own lightning ability right here on the Mist Continent. Yihan walked over, smiling, and the contrast between them was stark. Lang Feng, muscular and every inch the Special Forces king in appearance, sat helpless in chains, while Yihan stood there like a war god with a desert eagle in one hand and a machete in the other. Lang Feng, choking on his own words with embarrassment, remembered how he'd bragged before about being the king of Hyuxia Special Forces with astonishing talent, someone Yihan could call on in danger. And now here he was, curling his toes in shame at how that had turned out. Yihan simply raised his machete and sliced clean through the iron chains in one stroke, and Lang Feng broke into a cold sweat seeing the mirror-smooth cut, even a piece of the chair shaved off. What kind of blade could cut iron like that? Yihan asked how he'd been captured and whether he'd actually found the 4-star ruins, not wanting to waste the temporary team card. Lang Feng explained bitterly that the Sakura people had ambushed him while he was washing his face by a stream, numbing him with electric shocks before he could fight back. If it had been a fair fight, 3 against 1 wouldn't have worried him at all. He confirmed the ruins were in the cave ahead, found by the Sakura man, who'd wanted the key Lang Feng was carrying. Satisfied that the ruins had indeed been located, Yihan told him to rest while he handled the bodies, stripping Sato's corpse of its clothes and taking his 2-star samurai sword, though the other 2 underlings had nothing worth keeping, one carrying only a worthless 1-star axe and the other empty-handed. He had Linger burn the corpses to ash and wash away the remains with water, and Lang Feng, watching from behind, was struck utterly dumb with fear at the sight of Linger. Despite being a hardened Special Forces soldier who'd never known fear even in the worst situations, something about the pressure Linger radiated made him feel completely insignificant. Yihan handed him a set of clothes looted from Sato and asked about his talent in return, curious now that they finally had a chance to talk rather than Yihan simply killing on sight as he usually did. Lang Feng explained that his talent let him gain a mist beast's power by eating its meat, with a chance of inheriting a special ability too, which explained why he'd always wanted to buy the 4-star meat Yihan had. Eating 4-star bear meat could transform him briefly into a humanoid 4-star bear, possibly even inheriting the bear's berserk ability that grew stronger near death. Asked about limitations, Lang Feng admitted he couldn't eat meat from anything too powerful. 5- or 6-star meat would kill him outright, and that the transformation had a time limit, usable only at critical moments, after which his body would be left drained and weak. Yihan found this reasonable, having experienced something similar himself after eating 4-star bear paw. Despite his honest admission of weakness, Lang Feng insisted loudly that he was fine, that the Sakura man's lightning had merely tickled him, and that they should head to the ruins immediately. A man couldn't admit defeat, after all, though Yihan, recalling Lang Feng's screams earlier, said nothing and let him keep his pride. They set off with Lang Feng leading, and the cave ahead, thick with cold, damp mist, led them past the charred corpses of scorpion-like insects, clearly killed by the Sakura man's lightning. Deeper in stood a bronze door identical to the one Yihan had entered before. Lang Feng stopped and waited for Yihan, since the key was in Yihan's possession, and Yihan inserted it, swinging the door open, only for a scalp-crawling rustling sound to erupt from the darkness as a massive purple tide of venomous scorpions came pouring toward them. As expected, danger came the moment they stepped into the 4-star ruins. A massive swarm of vicious purple poisonous scorpions surged toward them, the kind of trial few survivors on the entire Mist Continent could hope to survive. Lang Feng's expression changed drastically behind Yihan. If he'd come here alone, even with his bear strength ability, he'd have had no chance against this swarm. His talent worked best on single targets, without any way to hit an area. He felt a wave of relief that he'd contacted Yihan after all, and looking at Yihan's unshaken figure, felt reassured once more. Yihan simply ordered Linger to burn them all, and she unleashed pillars of fire that left no scorpion alive in their path, even casually eating a few, though she clearly preferred fish to scorpion meat. Yihan, amused, asked Lang Feng if he ate scorpions, and Lang Feng, trying one that had been roasted, found it surprisingly delicious, only lacking salt and spice, which Yihan happily provided from his inventory, seasoning made from mist fire peppers. Both men ended up enjoying a scorpion snack together, marveling that ingredients on the Mist Continent needed almost no preparation to taste amazing. likely because life here existed on a higher level than back in their original world. Then the ground began to shake, and a huge scorpion emerged ahead, stabbing its stinger straight into Linger's body, to no effect at all. Linger tilted her head at it as if mocking its feeble attempt, and even as the scorpion's pincers snapped at her repeatedly, nothing could break through her defenses. Yi-Han told her to stop toying with it, suspecting she was showing off in front of Lang Feng, and Linger finally unleashed a storm of purple electric arcs that gathered on her horn and blasted the scorpion, freezing it in place with the shock. A system prompt announced that Linger had killed the 3-star purple poisonous scorpion king, earning a golden treasure chest. The same pattern as before, a king leading its swarm of lesser scorpions. Yi-Han sliced off a pincer and tossed it to Lang Feng as a small gift, and Lang Feng, utterly awed, accepted it gratefully. He'd already resigned himself to getting nothing from this dungeon crawl, considering himself lucky just to tag along with a powerhouse, so Yi-Han's generosity came as a pleasant surprise. They pressed on and soon emerged from the cave into open light, and Lang Feng, breathing deeply, marveled at finally being free of the mist shroud, feeling reborn. Yi-Han quickly spotted the guardian boss in the valley ahead. He mounted Linger, not letting Lang Feng ride along, and Lang Feng, still too intimidated by Linger to want to anyway, jogged along behind. The guardian turned out to be a black panther, which made Yi-Han frown. He'd wanted to try soloing a 4-star mist beast this time, with Linger only as backup, but a leopard's speed made that a genuinely difficult shot to land. Linger, sensing his hesitation, hinted at using her ice ability to slow it down, and Yi-Han, delighted by the suggestion, praised her cleverness. Behind them, Lang Feng was left in stunned silence. This creature could breathe fire, discharge lightning, and now freeze things too. Just how many abilities did it have? Could it possibly be some kind of divine beast? As the panther, sensing a fatal threat, paced and growled, Linger began releasing cold air to envelop the 4-star beast. Lang Feng shivered and stepped back as the temperature plummeted around them. Yet Yi-Han, still riding atop Linger's head, showed no discomfort at all. His clothes must carry special properties, Lang Feng realized, his sense of awe deepening once again. He'd once thought his solid foundation and strong talent placed him among the best of the survivors, but next to Yi-Han he felt utterly useless, and privately hoped for a chance to assist and prove himself. As the cold intensified, the Black Panther grew restless and struck first, moving like a bolt of black lightning almost too fast to track, lunging at Linger and biting down, only to find its teeth aching in agony and its tongue instantly frozen to Linger's body. Lang Feng, wide-eyed, likened it to licking a frozen pole in winter, only far more severe. The panther's tongue shattered as it struggled, and its once nimble body stiffened from the terrible cold. Seizing the moment, Yi-Han switched from his desert eagle to a UZ, not wanting to ruin the panther's beautiful glossy pelt with the eagle's destructive power. He had his eye on that fur, smoother than black satin, so different from the coarse bear hide he already had. He fired at the panther's right eye. The bullet punched through its skull and out its jaw, burying itself deep in the ground beyond. Lang Feng gaped, astonished that Yi-Han carried 2 guns. A pistol worth 1,000,000 mist coins with its red dot sight now moved to an Uzi, whose power seemed utterly disproportionate to its size. And found himself thinking, yet again, that just when he believed he'd seen the limit of Yi-Han's strength, Yi-Han would reveal something even greater, as if there were no ceiling at all. A system prompt announced Yi-Han had killed the 4-star Mist Panther and earned a diamond chest, bringing his total to 2 diamond chests plus 1 from the Scorpion King earlier. Hoping for a polymer coating, the one material he wanted most, needed to craft an axe. Yi-Han opened a golden chest first as a superstitious ritual, then the 2 diamond chests. The results: a team card from the golden chest, and from the diamond chests, a shelter upgrade card and, to his delight, the polymer coating itself. He examined the team card's rules. Teaming up this way locked the relationship for a full month, allowed shared shelter relocation, and made killing a teammate afterward turn the killer into a red-name survivor barred from various shelter privileges, which finally explained why Lu Zhao had spared Lai Hao rather than killing him outright. Yi-Han decided to set the card aside for now, and turned to the shelter upgrade card, aware Lang Feng surely wanted one. But upgrading his own 3-star shelter to 4-star required 3 such cards, and he was too short, so he couldn't give it away. Instead, he offered Lang Feng extra panther meat as compensation, and Lang Feng, grateful just for having survived the day thanks to Yi-Han, waved off any complaint, insisting he expected nothing at all. As Yi-Han divided the spoils on the ground, the Scorpion Corpse, Panther Corpse, and the Sakura Trio's dropped items. Lang Feng realized with fresh shock that Yi Han's material inventory could hold something exceeding the 100 kilograms limit of his own once-upgraded inventory, meaning Yi Han's capacity had been expanded multiple times over. Just how many chests had this man opened? Watching Lang Feng's stunned reaction filled Yi Han with quiet satisfaction. Acting cool really was its own reward. Though outwardly he stayed composed, calmly inspecting the loot in front of him. He complained that the cherry blossom people were surprisingly poor. Hardly anything of value on them, and Lang Feng chimed in that the dead man had called himself Sato Dafu, prompting Yi Han to snort that there was nothing rich about him at all, and both men laughed. Lang Feng guessed that most people had spent all their savings during the mist storm, which made sense to Yi Han. Merely surviving right now was already hard enough for most. Curious, Yi Han asked how Lang Feng made money, and Lang Feng explained cheerfully that he had a 2-star stone mine right at his doorstep and had made a fortune selling stone, especially during the storm. Inwardly thrilled that it was finally his turn to look impressive. Yi Han, amused, asked if he wasn't afraid of being robbed, and Lang Feng answered without hesitation that he'd hand over anything Yi Han wanted, since Yi Han had saved his life. He wasn't naive, and knew that staying close to Yi Han was itself a kind of life-saving charm. Yi Han, chuckling, gave him a leg and some ribs from the panther, suggesting he might inherit some of its speed by eating it, and Lang Feng eagerly accepted, thinking that beyond the meat itself, the real prize was the friendship forming between them. Once they finished packing up and washing off, Yi Han asked if there was anywhere else worth exploring nearby. Lang Feng mentioned a place resembling the entrance to an underground fortress that he hadn't dared investigate too deeply out of caution, and this instantly caught Yi Han's interest. He'd long been curious about the traces left by the Mist Continent's original inhabitants, having so far only encountered one dilapidated village himself. They set off, with Lang Feng leading and Yi Han observing the terrain by searchlight, noting that this area, called Allen Island X3, was richer in plant resources and stone fragments than his own barren, withered mountains. Though Lang Feng admitted he'd never actually seen a coastline despite the name suggesting an island. Lang Feng asked, half joking, whether Yi Han had once been some kind of in-house player, and Yi Han laughed, correcting him to beta tester and admitting he was half of one. Really, he said. He'd just read a lot of novels with settings similar to the Mist Continent, giving him a head start most people lacked. Lang Feng, who neither gamed nor read novels, was left speechless at the thought that his own losses came down to a simple gap in hobbies. Then Linger looked skyward abruptly, nearly throwing Yi Han off before he grabbed her horn just in time, and acid rain began falling, corrosive enough to smoke on contact with Lang Feng's clothes. Yi Han, who had anticipated extreme weather like this appearing on the Mist Continent sooner or later, had Linger extend her water control ability to shield him completely, the rain dispersing harmlessly around him, and then had her protect Lang Feng too when he cried out for help. Checking the World Channel while this went on, Yi Han found no mention of rain elsewhere, confirming the acid rain was only regional, alongside messages about a new mist beast appearing where none had before, a cold snap somewhere else, a solicitation ad from someone claiming various services, and a boastful challenge from a survivor claiming he'd killed a 4-star beast that evolved mid-fight and taunting Yi Han for once, snubbing his friend request. Yi Han read it all with a complicated look, shaking his head at the sheer diversity of humanity on display, before Lang Feng suddenly called out that they'd almost arrived. The underground fortress Lang Feng had mentioned was almost within reach, and Yi Han's curiosity was fully piqued. Ahead, under the searchlight's beam, a decaying architectural ruin came into view. Lang Feng explained he'd once gotten a golden treasure chest exploring it and had found an entrance to an underground passage, planning to return here after clearing the 4-star ruins. Before Yi Han could reply, Linger spoke up urgently, her body going rigid. She'd sensed danger. Yi Han told Lang Feng to step back while he advanced, and under the searchlight he spotted the threat. Not a mist beast, but a person. Or rather, what had once been a person, now a mutated corpse turned zombie by the mist's toxin. He'd killed zombies like this before, but this one was different. It had 2 heads, 3 arms, and 3 legs, a Sea Cthulhu-esque horror that made his scalp crawl. Its main body was a tall, middle-aged man, skin and eyes turned gray, dark vessels crawling across his face, with a second head. A woman's, missing its nose. Growing from his chest, and extra limbs sprouting at odd angles as if the creature had been stitched together. Lang Feng cried out in alarm, having never seen anything like it, and Yi Han wasted no time opening fire with his Uzi, blowing apart the first head. But the creature didn't die. The second head kept roaring as the body charged forward, so Yi Han fired again, destroying that head too and finally killing it. A system prompt confirmed he'd killed a 2-star zombie and received a life crystal. proof of a guess he'd already been forming, that zombies needed to reach a certain level to drop loot at all. The same rule that applied to mist beasts, which explained why the ordinary zombies he'd killed before had dropped nothing. The life crystal that appeared, described as pure life energy, capable of healing injuries, repairing genetic defects, and even raising one's life level, was rice grain-sized and glowing faintly. Yihan swallowed it immediately without hesitation but felt nothing afterward, reasoning that he was simply too strong now for such a weak crystal to have any noticeable effect. A bug might feel full on a grain of rice, but not a human. Still, he recognized this as valuable and resolved to gather more whenever possible, since it might save a life someday. Lang Feng, who hadn't seen Yihan swallow the crystal due to his angle, sighed over the tragedy of a dead survivor mutating into such a horror. And Yihan, seeing no reason to hide the truth, briefly explained the life crystal mechanic to him. This immediately worried Lang Feng. If others encountered similar zombies, someone would surely start deliberately killing survivors just to harvest life crystals from their mutated remains. Though gathering a large enough group of survivors to make this efficient remained difficult for now, as seen with Lu Zhao and Ku Zhihao capturing only Lai Hao, or Sato Dafu recruiting just 2 traitorous underlings. Both men agreed to be more careful of others in the future, recognizing the darker side of human nature this discovery implied. They continued to the underground passage entrance, a corroded metal plate like a manhole cover, which Lang Feng lifted to reveal a ladder below. Yihan had Linger shrink down to fit at the entrance and used his searchlight to check the depths. Another shock for Lang Feng, who hadn't realized Linger could change size at will, marveling again at just what level of mist beast she truly was, and openly envying Yihan's searchlight, a proper mist-shop purchase compared to the crude torch he'd once used himself. Yihan, smiling, didn't mention that his own shop just as often refreshed useless junk, content to let Lang Feng think him simply lucky. They descended about 100 steps to flat ground, where a corridor stretched into darkness ahead, and Lang Feng suddenly exclaimed that he could smell the salty tang of seawater. Yihan frowned, noting that water had clearly gotten into this place. Though he couldn't smell the seawater himself thanks to his aromatic mask, he could feel the high humidity and hear faint water sounds. Linger agreed, her body radiating a faint red warmth that lit the darkness more broadly than the searchlight, though with less range. As the 3 of them pressed on, the corridor sloped downward, cracks spreading across the ground in a way that made Lang Feng uneasy, and he judged this wasn't a place to linger long. At the end of the corridor, they found a spacious hall where a wall had collapsed, letting seawater flood in and submerge part of the floor. Marine life was already visible moving through it, a fish swimming past and an octopus fleeing the searchlight's beam in an instant. Lang Feng's mouth watered at the thought of seafood, having already tasted the Mist Continent's ingredients and knowing how good even simple scorpion meat could taste. But Yihan told him to hold off and explore first, despite craving it himself at the sight of a plump crab nearby. Lang Feng reported 3 passages on the left and 4 on the right, likely leading to various rooms, and left the arrangement to Yihan, who decided against splitting up, choosing to explore the left side together first. The first left passage led to a storage room, its rusted door lock sliced open by a single blade strike. The room, filled with empty racks, held nothing of value. Even a bag Lang Feng touched crumbled to powder in his hand. The next 2 left passages proved the same, evidently storerooms whose contents had long since been consumed. Yihan concluded this wasn't some fortress but a shelter, likely dug out by Mist Continent natives to shelter from disaster. And Lang Feng guessed the scale suggested only around 3 residents, hoping the remaining passages on the right would yield better results. The first right passage was another empty storage room, but the second led to 2 rooms that had clearly been bedrooms, complete with beds and a private bathroom. Unfortunately ruined by seawater backflow through the bathroom, with Lang Feng judging that these rooms would be half submerged at high tide. Both men mentally prepared to leave empty-handed, resolving at worst to treat the place as a seafood harvesting spot, since Lang Feng hadn't found a coastline near his own shelter, but this passage clearly reached the seabed. Lang Feng even offered to fetch seafood for Yihan in the future via trade, since his own shelter wasn't moving anytime soon, and Yihan happily agreed, saying he loved fish and crab. There was, however, a real find in the third right passage. A larger, dry room filled with stone carvings. A man and woman among them, likely the shelter's original owners, alongside animal and plant sculptures crafted with real skill. More importantly, Yihan found engraved text and an image on a nearby wall. Text that Lang Feng first mistook for Oracle bone script before Yihan corrected him, judging it a more advanced writing system where each character carried enormous meaning, likely far beyond quick deciphering even by experts. Yihan's real interest was the accompanying image, which he suspected was a map, and he asked Leng Feng, more familiar with the area, to help interpret it. Leng Feng pointed out landmarks matching their current position, his own shelter, and the 4-star ruins, though some features. A hill, a lake-like shape, didn't match what he'd actually seen, chalking it up to changes in the terrain over time. Yi Han then pointed to a spindle-shaped pattern near the map's edge, beneath waves, and both suspected it might mark a submarine. Leng Feng agreed with Yi Han's guess about the spindle-shaped mark possibly being a submarine, though he admitted the location was far and he'd never actually been there. Yi Han decided to note the spot down and investigate later, finishing his review of the map before they left the room. Only the last passage remained, leading to an empty, half-dug room that had clearly never been finished, marking the end of the underground shelter's exploration. Leng Feng sighed with mild disappointment, having expected a fortress full of food and advanced technology rather than this. Yi Han reassured him there'd still been some discoveries, that spindle icon likely marking a submarine from the original Mist Continent civilization, and suggested they gather some seafood before heading over to check it out. Back at the flooded end of the corridor, the seawater had begun rising, bringing more marine creatures into view. Yi Han had Linger fetch fish and crabs, and though she was visibly unhappy about being given such an unglamorous task, she obediently swam in and delivered a haul of fish and shrimp. Yi Han beamed at a large crab he picked up, delighted to finally indulge a craving he'd never been able to afford before, while Leng Feng marveled at an enormous spiny sea urchin, practically drooling. Suddenly a loud splash sounded, and the seawater turned black. Yi Han called for Linger with rising alarm when she didn't respond, his mind jumping to squid, possibly even a giant one. Linger finally surfaced, chattering anxiously, and Yi Han guessed correctly that a squid had appeared. He suggested she use her water control talent to trace its outline on the ground with streams of water, revealing indeed a squid's shape. And Linger complained at length, apparently blaming Yi Han for calling her back and making her abandon what would otherwise have been an easy catch. Yi Han brushed this off affectionately as fatherly concern, unconcerned about losing a mere 3-star squid as long as Linger was safe. They left the underground shelter, the acid rain still falling outside but posing no threat with Linger's protection, and rushed to the spindle-shaped location on the map at top speed. Something Leng Feng would never have dared alone, given the unknown dangers lurking in the mist, but with Linger's senses and Yi Han's searchlight, there was nothing to fear. To move faster, Yi Han had Leng Feng ride on Linger's tail rather than walk, and after more than an hour they arrived at a seaside dotted with reefs and floating kelp, just as the acid rain finally stopped. Yi Han sent Linger into the water to search the area and gather kelp, while he and Leng Feng waited on the reef, snacking on oysters and green-lipped mussels that Leng Feng pried open and ate raw, praising their fresh, milky flavor. Yi Han joined in with his triangular bayonet, marveling at the taste himself. Leng Feng admired the bayonet, having once owned a similar custom-made blade himself, and Yi Han mentioned casually that he'd gotten his from killing a woman, prompting Leng Feng to silently wonder just how many people Yi Han had killed by now, judging from his nonchalant tone. Half an hour later, surrounded by empty shells, Yi Han checked the World Channel while eating and discovered startling news. Someone had encountered a 4-star mist beast. Leng Feng, checking his own channel, reported a message about a survivor named Wang Hongyan who'd killed a 4-star horse, something Leng Feng hadn't even encountered yet. While Yi Han relayed a report about someone named Zhao Shengli, who'd run from a fierce tiger he was certain was 4-star, since he could have beaten a 3-star easily. This confirmed to Yi Han that, with the novice protection period ending, the mist was thickening and wild mist beasts growing stronger. 4-star beasts had begun appearing in the wild. Just then, Linger surfaced with a cry, kelp coiled around her tail, and something else held in her mouth. Both men's attention shifted entirely to Linger as she lowered her head and delivered the object from her mouth into Yi Han's hand. A small metal box, about half the size of a palm, surprisingly light rather than heavy as he'd expected. A system prompt identified it as a blade drone, a cutting-edge Mist Continent device usable for reconnaissance and attack, though currently lacking energy and a neural connection device, making it temporarily unusable. Puzzled that it didn't look like a drone at all and confused how one had ended up at the bottom of the sea, Yi Han asked Leng Feng's opinion. Leng Feng speculated that Mist Continent technology far surpassed their original worlds, admitting he'd never seen anything like this drone either, and guessed it was connected to the map carvings they'd found. The submarine the map marked was likely destroyed in whatever disaster had struck, but the drone had somehow survived. Yi Han pointed out that something this light should have simply washed away with the current, and Linger, flicking her tail, demonstrated by knocking a seashell straight into the reef, embedding it there, suggesting the drone had been similarly wedged into rock at the seabed. The mystery solved. Leng Feng chuckled with relief, feeling the weight lift off his shoulders, Everything from the underground shelter to this seaside trip had come from his own suggestions, and he'd have felt guilty if they'd returned with nothing. But now Yihan had gained a highly advanced piece of technology. Yihan thanked Leng Feng sincerely, crediting him for the find, and Leng Feng insisted he should be the one thanking Yihan instead, since without his help he'd have suffered a fate worse than death at the hands of the Sakura people. Realizing it was already past noon and they hadn't eaten, Yihan suggested a meal, pulling out a pot. Leng Feng produced one of his own, too. Yihan offered to share some meat from a 3-star fish king he had, and had Linger gather more ingredients while buying wood at the trading post for her to use as fuel. Leng Feng openly envied having such a capable helper, and Yihan joked that Linger was practically his own daughter. They feasted lavishly on seafood, with Linger devouring grilled frog, panther, and bear meat until oil dripped from her mouth, a sight that made Leng Feng gasp. Realizing this was exactly why Linger was so powerful, gorging on 4-star meat freely, while Leng Feng himself had been hoarding his own small stash of 4-star meat for emergencies rather than eating it casually. Thanks to knowing Yihan, he now had samples of all 3 types of 4-star mist beast meat, giving him more confidence in both combat and survival, as long as he avoided another ambush like the one from Sato Dafu. After eating, Leng Feng noted that since the novice protection period had ended, the mist had thickened and stronger mist beasts were emerging alongside other disasters, like the acid rain they'd just weathered and reports of an earthquake elsewhere. Yihan agreed this made sense. If shelter upgrade cards could only be obtained through 4-star ruins, the difficulty would be far too extreme. And people were likely already killing wild 4-star beasts to earn diamond chests and upgrade their shelters. He mentioned that sporadic 4-star beasts had likely existed even during the storm itself, which was how he'd obtained the frog meat they'd just eaten. A revelation that shocked Leng Feng further. Both agreed they needed to grow stronger quickly and stay alert against ambushes. Yihan packed away the seafood and seaweed they'd gathered, planning to send Leng Feng home since it was a long walk back to his shelter. But just then, a notification flashed across his survival panel. His shelter was under attack. Startled, Yihan stood up immediately, uncertain whether it was a mist, beast, or another survivor, but knowing he had to rush back regardless. Leng Feng told him to go, insisting he could walk home alone, and Yihan, in his hurry, ended his temporary team and vanished with Linger, forgetting his pot behind in his rush, which Leng Feng picked up to return later via trade. In an instant, Yihan found himself back at his shelter, where he saw a second shelter had appeared right beside his own, and a figure stood before it, waving its hands and chanting. With the bronze thorns that should have been guarding his home now lying docile and obedient at this stranger's feet. Yihan's heart skipped seeing this. The man ahead could actually control the bronze thorns. The thorns had their own will, and from the moment they were planted, their deepest instinct was to protect Yihan's shelter. Yet here they were, turned against him, clearly the work of this stranger's talent. Without wasting words, Yihan drew his desert eagle, intending to finish the man off immediately. But the stranger turned and spotted him first, cursing loudly at the sight of the gun and throwing his hands up defensively as a wall of bronze thorns rushed to shield him. It made no difference. Yihan's Desert Eagle, refined through repeated enlightenment to a terrifying 8-star rating, blasted the thorns apart on contact, the bullet flying straight toward the man's forehead. He roared, veins bulging, and to Yihan's shock, the bullet actually reversed mid-flight, turning back toward Yihan's own head. Death seemed certain for an instant, until Linger's tail lashed out and intercepted the bullet, which exploded against her, flames from its detonation property clinging to her tail. Linger absorbed the flames easily with her own fire control ability, but several of her scales had shattered from the impact, exposing raw flesh and blood. Her first injury ever, which struck Yihan like a blow to the heart. Enraged, Linger opened her mouth, ice, fire, and lightning gathering there in warning, and the man dropped to his knees, begging not to be killed. Yihan saw blood streaming from his 7 facial orifices, and his black hair turned entirely white. Clear signs of an enormous energy cost, which reassured Yihan that whatever this talent was, it had to have serious limits, much like Leng Feng's own restricted ability or Yihan's limited number of enlightenments. The man introduced himself as Bayan Yituo, claiming in fluent Hyuxia language to love Hyuxia culture and even work as a professional Go player, insisting this was all a misunderstanding since he'd thought the shelter was ownerless. Yihan mocked him for claiming Go originated from his own kimchi country rather than Hyuxia, and the desperate man, eager to survive, agreed that kimchi country was merely a vassal of Hyuxia, words clearly spoken against his true beliefs. Asked coldly about his talent, Bayan Yituo, grasping at any chance to live, offered to team up and revealed his ability was called Reversal. Yihan immediately understood its implications. Coughing blood, curled into a hunched shape, Bayan Yituo explained that anything meant to attack him could be reversed to attack its source instead, or even be turned to serve him. A genuinely formidable rule-type talent, though clearly with massive costs given his wretched state. He continued pleading that it was all a misunderstanding. He'd arrived via a random relocation card, seen the shelter, called out to check if anyone was home, and the thorns had attacked him first, forcing him to use his talent in self-defense, insisting he wasn't trying to steal the shelter and was, in fact, a good person. Yihan believed the part about the relocation card, but nothing else. This man, whose name roughly translated to a piece of shit, said afterward. Noting that Bayan Yituo likely didn't have much life left in him anyway, Yihan raised his machete and approached, and the man's expression collapsed in panic, protesting that he was a Go World champion who'd always maintained friendly relations with Huxia players and never abused his talent against them, declaring his love for Huxia country as he prostrated himself. But with the blade already at his throat, Yihan told him that if he told the truth now, he might be spared. And Bayan Yituo finally confessed that after arriving, he'd wanted to seize the shelter for himself, and admitted he'd once used his rule-based talent to cheat a Huaxia opponent to win his world championship title, sobbing and trembling that he deserved to die and begging forgiveness. Yihan, unmoved, told him that since he'd said himself he deserved death, his wish would be granted. And with one stroke of the blade, cut his throat, killing him instantly. A system prompt confirmed the drop of Bayan Yituo's items. A long list, suggesting he'd been fairly wealthy. But Yihan didn't linger over it, checking Linger's wound first. She indicated she was fine, her flesh already beginning to regenerate, and Yihan felt a wave of gratitude and lingering fear, recognizing how close he'd come to disaster. Bayan Yituo's reversal had weakened the returning bullet somewhat, and combined with Linger's own toughness, the injury hadn't been severe. But Linger had saved his life yet again. The sudden confrontation ended with Bayan Yituo's death. His talent had been genuinely powerful, but encountering Yihan had sealed his fate. Yihan, stroking Linger's now fully healed head, remarked that if this talent had been leveled up further, killing him wouldn't have been so simple. Linger, as expected of a super mist beast, recovered remarkably fast. She nudged him affectionately, then gestured with her tail toward Bayan Yituo's corpse, prompting Yihan to search it before she cremated it. He found nothing valuable beyond the clothes, which he kept out of habit, and figured the rest had already dropped into his inventory. But just as he was about to have Linger burn the body, gray patterns began spreading across the corpse, and it opened its eyes, roaring, turned into a zombie despite having just died. Cursing that the man was still causing trouble even in death, Yihan split its skull with his machete, and a prompt confirmed he'd killed a 2-star zombie, obtaining another life crystal, slightly larger than the previous one, which Yihan reasoned was likely due to Bayan Yituo's strong talent and correspondingly robust body. Regretting that this crystal couldn't be enhanced through enlightenment, he simply put it away to accumulate slowly, then had Linger burn the corpse to ash and wash the area clean. Bayan Yituo's 2-star shelter still stood nearby. Oddly, it was a 2-story building, which puzzled Yihan since his own 3-star shelter had only 1 floor. As he approached to investigate, Leng Feng messaged him, asking if he was all right and mentioning he'd forgotten his pot, which Leng Feng now had extra seafood in and would trade back later. Yihan explained briefly that someone from Kimchi country had tried to invade his shelter, and Leng Feng, alarmed to hear about a rule-type talent, noted how dangerous it could have been if Yihan's attack hadn't been strong enough to trigger a backlash. Both agreed to stay vigilant against unusual talents going forward. Leng Feng then mentioned he'd seen something about 2-story shelters on the World Channel before. A shelter expansion card that let a shelter be enlarged once paired with the right materials. Something someone had shown off online that Leng Feng happened to catch amid the flood of messages Yihan himself often missed. Yihan noted this down, intrigued. Leng Feng offered to trade the pot back right away, but Yihan asked him to wait while he searched Bayan Yituo's shelter first, planning to pass along anything unneeded. Inside, the first floor held mostly common 1- and 2-star supplies. Wood, stone, metal, hides, food, plus a small stash of 3-star dog meat, a type Yihan had never obtained before and kept for later. And roughly 300+ kg of 3-star metal that Bayan Yituo had apparently been saving to upgrade his own shelter. None of it was worth passing to Leng Feng, who didn't lack such basics either. Yihan figured he'd just sell it off for mist coins as usual. Upstairs, the second floor held Bayan Yituo's bed, on which lay a set of clothes stripped from another victim, proof he'd killed at least once before, along with a storage cabinet. Inside, Yihan found a strangely shaped cup that Linger, curious, poked her head through the window to inspect. Yi Han quickly identified it as something unsavory, dirtied by its previous owner, though he privately planned to hand it off to Lang Feng as a joke later. More usefully, the cabinet also held a fingertip-sized transparent block, surprisingly heavy. Clearly why Bayan Yituo hadn't carried it around given his limited inventory space. A system description revealed it was a drone energy block, the essential power source for the blade drone Yi Han already had, usable almost indefinitely unless attack functions drained it heavily, currently sitting at 68% charge. Seeing this, Yi Han couldn't hold back a delighted grin. Yi Han's eyes lit up with delight. First a blade drone, and now its energy block too. His luck really was excellent, and he silently thanked Bayan Yituo for the unwitting gift. All that remained missing was a neural connection device to make the drone usable, something he'd simply have to wait for fate to provide. He stored the energy block alongside the drone, noting it was even heavier than the drone itself and would likely account for most of its combined weight. Aside from the energy block, the cabinet held nothing else of value, perhaps prized by Bayan Yituo, but beneath Yi Han's notice. Deciding against sitting on Bayan Yituo's bed out of sheer disgust at imagining its previous use, Yi Han instead sat on the stairs with Linger to review his loot from the man's death. A lightning rod blueprint to protect his shelter from heavenly lightning, an explosion-proof shield blueprint capable of blocking 3-star level attacks, and a set of 3-star nunchucks explicitly warned to turn their wielder into a zombie if mishandled, alongside some food and water. Yi Han judged the two blueprints valuable, but had no idea how to use nunchucks himself, deciding to pass them to Lang Feng instead, while grumbling that Bayan Yituo's material inventory had apparently never been upgraded at all, limiting what little he'd carried. He invited Lang Feng to trade, promising good things, and Lang Feng, thrilled at the idea of anything Yi Han considered good, immediately accepted, offering up Yi Han's forgotten pot, along with a pot of seafood in return for the cup and the nunchucks. When the trade completed, Lang Feng's expression turned complicated upon holding the cup, immediately recognizing it as something he'd never use, and clearly already used by its previous owner. Undoubtedly that man from kimchi country. Yi Han only laughed uproariously in response, but Lang Feng's eyes lit up properly at the nunchucks. Most people struggled with them and risked hitting themselves. A real danger, given the item's warning about turning into a zombie from self-inflicted injury. But as a highly trained special forces, soldier skilled in cold weapons, firearms, and hand-to-hand combat alike, nunchucks posed no such risk for him. Overjoyed, he thanked Yi Han and offered missed coins in return, insisting he had nothing else suitable to give. But Yi Han declined the trade, telling him there was no need to fuss over such things between friends, and urged him to hurry home before dark, adding that Lang Feng could always call on him again in the future since this was a mutually beneficial partnership. Deeply moved, Lang Feng agreed, expressing how honored he felt to have met someone like Yi Han on the Mist Continent, and promised to keep more temporary team cards on hand so they could reunite whenever needed. Understanding that Yi Han preferred to remain a lone wolf rather than commit to permanent teams. With that, Lang Feng hurried off toward his own shelter before nightfall. Meanwhile, Yi Han turned his attention to what to do with Bayan Yituo's 2-story shelter, genuinely tempted by its size and wanting to expand his own. He tested whether he could use his remaining shelter upgrade card on it, and a prompt revealed that doing so would merge the two shelters together, though continued upgrades afterward would require even more resources. Excited by the possibility, and reasoning that wild 4-star mist beasts were already beginning to appear, making future shelter upgrade cards easier to obtain, Yi Han chose to merge them, consuming 1,000 kilograms of 3-star ore, double the usual amount owing to Bayan Yituo's shelter having already been expanded once. Having mined 2 mountains worth of ore already, this cost him nothing meaningful. In a flash of light, Bayan Yituo's building transformed into the metal structure matching Yi Han's own shelter, merging into a single 3-star shelter shaped like the character pin, with triple the previous floor area. Yi Han was thrilled to finally live in what amounted to a small villa. The only drawback was that the bronze thorns, already damaged from being shot earlier, could no longer cover the now larger perimeter, crawling submissively around Yi Han's feet as if apologizing. Yi Han reassured them they weren't at fault, having simply been controlled by someone else's talent, and resolved to keep strengthening them going forward. Though for now, he couldn't bring himself to feed them anything too valuable, given Linger's ever-growing appetite, recognizing there was still much to do. More 4-star beasts to hunt for shelter upgrade cards, and 2 new blueprints plus the unfinished ACK project waiting for his attention. Yi Han checked the time and decided to take Linger out again to search for more 4-star mist beasts. Wanting to keep boosting his combat power and upgrade his shelter further, Yi Han knew he needed more 4-star metal and stone, both essential for shelter upgrades and for crafting the ACK he still hadn't gotten around to building. He could technically use enlightenment on lower-tier ore to convert it, but couldn't bear to waste the opportunity that way. So he set out on Linger once more, aiming first to check on his 2 already mined-out mines while browsing the world channel. Messages flew past. Someone admitting they'd killed a person and, though initially frightened, now felt nothing about it. Another celebrating finally reaching a 3-star shelter after a hard struggle. Someone else recounting a terrifying encounter with a 3-headed Cthulhu-like monster that survived having 1 head blown off. And a taunting message directed at Yihan himself, daring him to show up and fight. Yihan noted with interest that the 3-headed monster must be an evolved zombie, likely 3-star at minimum, and wondered idly whether its life crystal would be worth eating. He ignored the insults, recognizing them as coming from jealous people with nothing better to do. Inviting him to team up and being refused, or being denied friend requests, driving them to lash out. There was no point arguing with people who'd likely be dead before long anyway. What genuinely interested him was news of a red-name survivor now wanted with a bounty in some region. He added the person who'd posted the message as a friend, expecting a delay before acceptance. But the request went through instantly. It turned out this person, a survivor named Zhu Zhu, had already sent Yihan a friend request previously, so both requests simply completed the connection automatically. Before Yihan could even ask his question, Zhu Zhu bombarded him with enthusiastic messages calling him an idol and expressing disbelief that Yihan had actually accepted his request, promising to go brag about it on the World Channel immediately. Yihan, slightly embarrassed by the excitement, asked directly about the red-name survivor, but Zhu Zhu didn't reply right away, apparently busy showing off as promised, and returned 2 minutes later, mentioning that his sudden popularity had attracted people asking him to help curse Yihan out, which he'd refused and blocked. Yihan found the whole situation faintly absurd, wondering just how much jealousy could warp people's judgment. Zhu Zhu confirmed the red-name survivor was in his own region and explained the mechanics of the bounty system. Red-name survivors, marked for killing a teammate, were regionally wanted and barred from certain privileges for a time, which Yihan already knew. What interested him more was the reward structure. When a red-name survivor appeared, every survivor in that region received a notification and a map marking only the target's location, encouraging others to hunt them down. The reward wasn't a chest or materials, but a choice of one of 3 options: a talent upgrade, a shelter upgrade, or a complete map of a designated region. All 3 were tempting, and Zhu Zhu reported that his entire region was scrambling to find the target first. Yihan, too, felt drawn to the reward. Most survivors still had only 2-star shelters, making the shelter upgrade option a shortcut many would kill for. And even those who'd already upgraded their talent once or twice tended to crave more after tasting the benefit. But for Yihan personally, the complete regional map was the real prize, something he considered a true treasure. He asked Zhu Zhu urgently whether he had a temporary team card, but Zhu Zhu didn't, leaving Yihan briefly disappointed until he had Zhu Zhu ask around the regional channel on his behalf, promising a reward for the help. Zhu Zhu happily agreed, eager to please someone as impressive as Yihan, confident he wouldn't be treated unfairly. Meanwhile, Linger had already carried Yihan to his 2 collapsed mines, now lushly regrown with vegetation, the sounds of mist beasts echoing faintly through the mist ahead. And just then, Zhu Zhu's message came through with excited news. Someone in the region did have a temporary team card. Someone in the region had a temporary team card. If so, they could invite Yihan to join a temporary team, letting him descend into this region to hunt the red-name survivor. Yihan quickly asked Zhu Zhu for the person's survivor ID, and Zhu Zhu sent it over, adding a pleading reminder not to forget him once things were done. Clearly worried Yihan might discard him after getting what he needed, Yihan reassured him his reward would come through. On the other end, Yihan saw the friend request had already gone through instantly, since this survivor, a woman named Zhu Yazhu, had also previously sent Yihan a request of her own. She gushed that she was his fan, claiming she'd even gone out of her way to friend and curse back at someone who'd insulted him on the World Channel. When Yihan thanked her, she mentioned Zhu Zhu had told her he needed a temporary team card and that she had one, and Yihan asked her to invite him over, promising a satisfying reward for her help hunting the red-name survivor. She insisted no reward was necessary, eager to help however she could, and sent the invitation, leaving Yihan pleased that his reputation was proving genuinely useful. Both Zhu Zhu and Zhu Yazhu clearly saw him as a powerhouse worth impressing, and in truth, his actual strength far exceeded what either of them imagined. Accepting the invitation, Yihan descended right beside Zhu Yazhu, who greeted him with exaggerated praise about his looks before hugging his arm and pressing against him with a coquettish voice. Yihan quietly withdrew his arm, unmoved, only for her to suddenly hug him tighter and try to kiss him. even inviting him back to her nearby shelter with unmistakable intent. Yi Han's scalp crawled with discomfort, until Linger poked her head in, staring at Zhu Yaju and sticking out her tongue, startling her so badly she fell backward onto the ground, trembling and scrambling away, only barely avoiding wetting herself from fright. Yi Han, secretly delighted at Linger's timing, told her gently not to scare their guest, then reassured Zhu Yaju that Linger was well behaved. Shaken and pale, but recovering her composure, Zhu Yaju agreed to lead the way toward the Red Name survivor, since Yi Han, having arrived via temporary team rather than as a regional resident, couldn't see the target's location himself and needed a local guide, though he privately would have preferred Zhao Zhu for this task instead of her if only Zhao Zhu had possessed a card. With Linger's presence keeping her thoroughly cowed, Zhu Yaju abandoned her seductive act entirely, settling into the role of a simple guide. Zhu Zhu, checking in eagerly, reported that the red-named survivor, a man named Ku Hongyang, had boasted arrogantly on the regional channel, threatening to flay Yi Han's skin into a drum if he dared show up. Yi Han asked whether Zhu knew anything about the man's talent or weapons, wanting information given how dangerous unknown talents like Bayan Yutuo's had proven to be. But Zhao Zhu apologetically admitted he had no idea, since Ku Hongyang had never mentioned it. Riding Linger with Zhu Yaju leading on foot, Yi Han observed the dense forest terrain of this region. Zhu Yaju told him it was called the Forest of Despair, and Yi Han reflected that between this place and Leng Feng's Allen Island, both were clearly better than his own withered mountains. He privately planned that once he killed Ku Hongyang and claimed the complete map of a designated region reward, he'd pick somewhere prosperous to relocate his shelter to. Frustrated by their slow pace after over 10 minutes of walking with the target still far off, Yi Han had Zhu Yaju climb up and hold Linger's tail for a speed boost. Despite Linger's clear reluctance and dislike of carrying this particular passenger, worse even than her tolerance for Leng Feng, though she agreed regardless for Yi Han's sake. As they sped along, Leng Feng messaged in, excitedly reporting that he'd used the nunchucks to beat a 3-star mist beast to death, and asked what Yi Han was up to. Learning that Yi Han was now hunting a red-named survivor left Leng Feng stunned and full of wonder at how eventful Yi Han's day had become. Clearing a 4-star ruins together that morning, then a home invasion by a man from Kimchi country, and now a full-blown manhunt. Leng Feng wished he could join in himself, but had no way to get there, more realistically focused on getting back to his own shelter before dark. Meanwhile, holding onto Linger's tail, Zhu Yaju nervously asked Yi Han to protect her later, admitting that Ku Hongyang already knew she was the one guiding him and had threatened to kill her for it. Yi Han was mildly surprised the news had leaked so fast. Zhao Zhu had already announced on the World Channel that Ku Hongyang was waiting for Yi Han to arrive and die, and now the man wanted to kill Zhu Yaju too. She explained tearfully that Zhu Zhu had first bragged in the regional channel about befriending Yi Han, then revealed that Yi Han needed a temporary team card to descend into the Forest of Despair. Even though she'd only messaged Zhu Zhu privately about having such a card, she'd previously mentioned owning one in the regional channel herself, which was how she'd been exposed. Yi Han understood immediately. The real culprit was Zhu Zhu's loose tongue, since he'd had no need to broadcast any of it publicly, and Zhu Yaju's own past comment about the card had come back to bite her. This confirmed for Yi Han why he himself always stayed quiet. You never knew when an offhand remark might return to haunt you later, and Zhu Yaju's situation proved the point perfectly. Yi Han reassured her he'd protect her, telling her to peel off once they got close and let him handle Ku Hongyang alone, promising compensation afterward and that he wouldn't renege on his word. Relieved, Zhu Yaju settled onto Linger's tail and opened the regional channel to hurl insults at Ku Hongyang, emboldened by Yi Han's protection, declaring he had no idea what kind of opponent he'd provoked. This lit up the regional channel with eager onlookers speculating about Yi Han's appearance, teasing Zhu Yaju about seducing him for an easy life of 4-star meat and luxury, while others mocked the idea that Ku Hongyang needed outside help to be dealt with, insisting his death was already a guaranteed treasure that Zhou Zhu and Zhu Yaju had no right to claim ahead of the locals, with one person declaring he'd rush over immediately and kill Yi Han too if he tried to take the reward. Zhu Yaju filtered through the chaos and reported the most relevant threat to Yi Han. Someone was on their way to steal Ku Hongyang's death and the reward for himself, and Yi Han simply acknowledged it calmly, unbothered. Privately, Yi Han felt this Ku Hongyang was likely no ordinary opponent. Anyone who deliberately killed a teammate and became a red-name survivor, fully aware of the consequences, had to either be a fool or someone utterly confident in his own power. And Yi Han suspected the latter, guessing that hunting other survivors was Ku Hongyang's true motive for embracing red-name status in the first place, which would make him a genuinely dangerous adversary. Of course, when it came to confidence, Yi Han wasn't about to lose to anyone. Zhu Yaju mentioned 2 more people in the regional channel who were furious with Yi Han specifically, suggesting he kill them too after dealing with Q Honggang. Though in truth, her real motive was that these 2 had been insulting her personally, and she wanted Yi Han's help getting revenge. Yi Han ignored the suggestion entirely, offering only a cold silence in response, which left Zhu Yaju quietly seething but unable to push further as she announced they were nearly at their destination. Anxious that Yi Han might bring her too close and give Ku Honggang a chance to kill her, Yi Han told her to get off here and make her own way home or find somewhere safe to hide, and she agreed, wishing him safety while suggestively hinting that he could come find her afterward if he wanted to unwind, twisting her body for emphasis. A blatant attempt to keep herself attached to his protection, given how dangerous the Mist Continent was for a woman trying to survive alone. Yi Han ignored her completely and rode on, leaving her fuming and privately grumbling that he must not like women, wondering aloud whether he preferred that big snake instead. Thoughts that, had Linger overheard them, would likely have gotten her blasted to ash on the spot. Unaware and indifferent to her complaints regardless, Yi Han saw a dense forest looming ahead, its scope clearly vast despite the limited visibility. Ku Honggang's territory. He had Linger continue forward, gradually penetrating deeper into the woods, hearing sounds ahead before spotting any figures, with Linger tensing into a combat-ready stance. Yi Han had her pause to listen before deciding their next move. A confident male voice rang out, declaring that killing Qiu Hongjiang would earn a 3-star shelter, and Qiu Hongjiang's own nasal, mocking voice responded, calling the challenger laughable trash and revealing that becoming a red name survivor had been a deliberate strategy to hunt fools just like him. The other voice, undeterred, boasted that his own talent would bring Ku Honggang genuine terror, and the 2 prepared to fight. Yi Han had Linger shrink down so they could approach unseen, using the abundant trees for cover, and as they drew closer, he finally took in the scene. An unusual clearing where the trees grew at deliberate angles, interlocking to form a wooden house suspended in midair, with a middle-aged man with large ears standing coldly at its entrance. Looking down from above, unmistakably Qiu Honggang, the red-named survivor of the Forest of Despair. Yi Han studied Qiu Honggang's appearance and nodded. The word villain seemed written all over his face, exactly as expected of a red-named survivor. Following Honggang's gaze downward, he spotted a pockmarked young man standing in a clearing below, a black sickle in hand, staring up defiantly. A sickle is a weapon. Yi Han hadn't seen one before, and he held back, content to watch with curiosity rather than reveal himself yet. Ku Honggang sneered down at the youth, dismissing him as an ant about to become one of his sacrifices. A word that made both the youth and Yi Han's heart skip. What was Ku Honggang really planning? Yi Han wondered whether some powerful mist beast lurked deeper in the forest, receiving benefits from sacrificed survivors, a plot he'd seen in novels before. But instinct told him something didn't quite fit that theory. The pockmarked youth, fiery-tempered, cursed back and charged forward, and Qiu Honggang responded with a sneer, stretching his hands through the air in a dance-like motion. A gesture Yi Han recognized uncannily as identical to Bayan Yituo's own wind-up, making him wonder if villains coordinated their special move poses somehow. A surge of tree branches erupted from all directions toward the youth, confirming Yi Han's earlier guess that Ku Honggang's talent involved plant control. A devastating combination, given the forest environment, one that would mean certain death for an ordinary survivor. But the pockmarked youth showed no fear, snorting coldly and swinging his sickle, sending out arcs of decaying black energy that withered every branch they touched on contact. Yi Han, briefly startled at what looked like a grim reaper's scythe, quickly accepted it as unsurprising given the sheer number of survivors in existence. Powerful weapons like this were bound to appear among them, but the youth surprised him further by openly admiring the enemy's ambush. No, rather, Qiu Honggang openly coveted the youth's sickle instead, his eyes flashing with greed as he declared he wanted the weapon for himself, unleashing more roots that wrapped around the youth's ankles and legs, immobilizing him on the spot. Unfazed, the youth mocked Qiu Honggang for having nothing more to offer, then burst into flame, the fire instantly burning away all the roots binding him. His own talent, a strong fire ability. Yi Han nodded, impressed by both fighters, recognizing them as likely the top experts of this part of the Forest of Despair. Ku Honggang continued his assault with branches, roots, and vines, refusing to believe the youth could sustain his flames indefinitely, while the youth similarly doubted Ku Honggang could maintain such intense control forever. The battle settling into a war of attrition, each testing who would break first. Yi Han watched with genuine interest, mindful only that Ku Honggang had to die by his own hand specifically to claim the red name bounty reward. If the youth won, Yi Han would step in and finish Honggang himself. If Honggang won, Yi Han would intercept him before the youth could claim the kill. Meanwhile, the regional channel buzzed with commentary. People wondering if there was a live audience narrating the fight, speculating whether Yi Han might already be dead since Kuohonggang still lived. While others voiced confidence in Yi Han, given his history of killing a 4-star beast, something Kuohonggang had never done. Others demanded to know where Zhu Yaju had gone, and someone mocked Zhu Zu for bringing a dangerous ally into their midst, predicting that Yi Han would kill him first once this was all over. Zhou Zu ignored the insults, focused entirely on the reward he expected from Yi Han afterward, having grown genuinely poor since the mist storm. Zhu Yaju, however, lost her temper and fired back at her attackers, particularly one named Zhang Ao, boasting outrageously that Yi Han had promised to sleep with her after killing Kuohonggang and would use her pillow talk to hunt Zhang Ao down next. Zhang Ao's heart sank briefly before he recovered, reasoning that Zhu Yaju had no way of knowing his location in such a vast forest, and fired back with crude insults of his own, boasting that he too had a random relocation card. A total lie, since neither of them had anything beyond empty bravado backing up their words. As the two traded insults, the battle between Kuohonggang and the pockmarked youth reached a fever pitch, both fighting with genuine ferocity, evenly matched. The youth steadily advancing while decaying every plant in his path and burning the remains. The coming outcome likely to hinge on which of them was more ruthless. Then, unexpectedly, Kuohonggang smirked and waved his hand, revealing a zombie bound to a branch behind him, still alive enough to move its head, snapping uselessly at him without reach. Without even glancing at it, Kuohonggang summoned another branch to pierce straight through its skull, and a rice grain-sized white crystal appeared in his hand. A life crystal, which he swallowed in one gulp. This scene made the pockmarked youth's pupils shrink. He couldn't understand what Kuohonggang was doing, but sensed instantly that it wasn't good, a wave of dread rising in him. Kuohonggang, having swallowed the life crystal, burst into laughter, mocking Yi Han by name, believing, wrongly, that the pockmarked youth in front of him was actually Yi Han, and waved his arms, sending another wave of branches to attack. Yi Han, watching from hiding, noted privately that Kuohonggang had indeed recovered his condition after eating the crystal, though it would have done nothing for Yi Han himself given his strength and physique. He'd need something far more potent. More amusingly, Yi Han realized Kuohonggang genuinely believed the pockmarked youth was him. Was he really that ugly? The pockmarked youth had no chance to correct the mistake, caught in a heavy encirclement as his situation grew dire. Both sides had been fighting long enough to reach their limits, but Kuohonggang, unfairly, had used some kind of drug boost to keep going, which the youth condemned as shameless. Gritting his teeth, he swung his sickle even as flames weakened on his body, clearly nearing exhaustion. More branches struck him, drawing blood, roots binding his feet in place. Worse, Yi Han noticed the youth's face turning visibly green. He'd been poisoned, Kuohonggang's plant control talent extending naturally to poisonous plants, something Yi Han knew existed even in his own world and assumed the Mist Continent had in abundance too. The youth, in agony, cursed Kuohonggang as despicable for using poison, his heart racing, head splitting, green blood leaking from his nose before he collapsed entirely. Unable to move, Kuohonggang gloated that even without poison, the youth never stood a chance against him, mocking the reputation of the first 3-star shelter survivor as overrated. Confident in his victory, he opened the regional channel to boast, taunting Zhao Zu and Zhu Yaju for allying with Yi Han, declaring Yi Han already trampled beneath him like a dead dog and demanding to know who else dared challenge him. This caused an uproar in the regional channel. A flood of messages from people eager to side with the apparent victor, offering loyalty, while a few voices, including Zhao Zu and Zhu Yaju themselves, expressed disbelief, particularly Zhu Yaju, who had actually seen Yi Han in person and knew the crushing presence Linger carried. She couldn't imagine how Kuohonggang could possibly have overcome that. Confused by the mention of a giant snake, Kuohonggang paused, uncertain where such a detail had come from. At that moment, the pockmarked youth, lying on the ground, cursed back weakly that he wasn't Yi Han at all. His name was Zhao Shu. Before coughing violently and spitting up green blood, his eyes rolling back. Startled, Kuohonggang looked around frantically, realizing his mistake. If this formidable fighter wasn't even Yi Han, then where was the real one? A chill ran through him just as a red targeting dot appeared over his heart. His expression shifted in horror, and he tried desperately to manipulate branches to shield himself or dive for cover. But it was already too late. His body convulsed as a bullet tore through his heart, blasting a burning hole through his chest. The gunshot sound only reaching his ears after the fatal damage had already been done. The bullet's speed had outpaced both sound and his own reaction time entirely. He didn't die instantly, coughing blood as he struggled to reach for his branches. And Yi Han spotted a bound zombie hidden behind Kuhongang's wooden house, revealing that the man had intended to kill it for another life crystal. Futile now, since even if it could heal a shattered heart, there simply wasn't time. Kuhongang collapsed and died completely. A world announcement rang out, declaring Yi Han the first to kill a red-name survivor and awarding him a diamond chest, along with the promised choice of one reward from 3 options: a talent upgrade, a shelter upgrade, or a complete map of a designated region. The regional channel exploded with reactions as Yi Han, without hesitation, chose the 3rd option, something he'd already decided on long ago. Since the first 2 rewards could be replicated by opening chests and gathering supplies, while the map held irreplaceable value at this stage, a prompt confirmed his reward, explaining he could enter a designated region's name and id to receive its complete map whenever ready. Satisfied, Yi Han decided not to rush the decision, already ruling out his own withered mountains in favor of somewhere better like Allen Island or the Forest of Despair. Reflecting on the situation, Yi Han understood now that Kuhonggang had killed the pockmarked Zhaoshu and taken his dropped items. And by killing Kuhonggang in turn, Yi Han had inherited the gains from both of them. Though he decided not to check the loot yet, needing first to make use of the sacrifice, the zombies that formed from the dead, which he now understood was Kuhongyang's true goal all along, harvesting life crystals from them. Kongyang and Zhaoshu, both now dead, had already begun mutating. Yi Han watched gray lines spread across Zhaoshu's face, his wide eyes turning gray too, a gurgling sound still coming from his throat despite being dead, as he regained the ability to move and crawled toward Yi Han. Yi Han casually kicked him away, sending Zhaoshu's zombie crashing into Kuangjang's own corpse, which had just finished its own transformation and opened its mouth to bite Zhaoshu's zombie in turn. The 2 bodies gnawed at each other, then began to bizarrely fuse together, the surrounding mist seeming to catalyze the process, the sight making Yi Han's scalp crawl. What emerged was a single mutated zombie with 2 heads and 4 arms and legs. Yi Han judged it to be at least 3-star, given that neither man had been weak, both standouts among the survivors of the Forest of Despair. Recalling that more zombies were still nearby, Yi Han had Linger bring over the 2 ordinary zombies Kuhonggang had bound earlier as sacrifices, now freed since Kuhonggang could no longer control the branches restraining them. The newly fused mutant zombie devoured both ordinary zombies whole, 1 bite at a time, without any further fusion occurring. Apparently their tier was too low to qualify for merging, only for consumption. With only the mutated zombie left, Yi Han decided not to waste bullets. Instead, drawing his machete and cutting it clean in half with a single stroke despite its newfound power, then piercing both heads to finish it off completely. A system prompt confirmed he'd killed a 3-star zombie and obtained a life crystal. Noticeably larger than before, the size of a peanut kernel compared to the previous rice grain-sized ones, with a richer glow. Yi Han put it away with satisfaction, recalling how Kuhonggang, in bad shape from the earlier fight, had recovered significant strength from eating his own crystal, suppressing Zhaoshu almost immediately afterward. He had Linger burn away the remaining zombie remains, complaining about the smell. Meanwhile, the regional channel of the Forest of Despair had erupted into chaos. A flood of messages reacting to the world announcement that Yi Han had killed Kuhonggang, some lamenting that all the rewards now belonged to Yi Han. Others confused how Kuhonggang, who'd been boasting about killing Yi Han moments earlier, had ended up dead himself instead, and many demanding Zhao Zhu and Zhu Yazhu explain what had really happened, including questions about the rumored giant snake. Both had already sent Yi Han private messages asking for details, and Yi Han, ignoring Zhu Yazhu for now, replied to Zhou Zhu first, explaining briefly that Kuhonggang had mistaken another survivor for him and paid the price. He then offered to reward Zhu Zhu for his help as an informant and go-between, recognizing that Zhou Zhu remained useful. Effectively, a living teleportation point Yi Han could rely on as long as he stayed alive in the Forest of Despair, equivalent to having a free temporary team card on standby. Trembling with excitement, Zhu Zhu asked boldly for a 3-star shelter, though he acknowledged it was a big ask. Yi Han explained he only had 3-star metal ore to offer, not an upgrade card, leaving Zhao Zhu disappointed but understanding, and he settled instead for asking for however much ore Yi Han could spare. Specifically, 260 kilograms still needed to complete his own shelter upgrade, since collecting or buying that much himself would be slow and costly. Yi Han agreed readily, having personally mined over 20 tons from 2 hollowed-out mountains, making such an amount trivial. Zhu Yazhu, meanwhile, grew increasingly anxious as Yi Han left her message unanswered, worried he might renege on his promise, even pestering Zhu Zhu in the regional channel and privately to intervene on her behalf. When Yi Han finally responded, asking simply what reward she wanted, she pleaded to be allowed to follow and serve him directly. But Yi Han, uninterested and unmoved by her flattery, warned he'd withdraw the offer entirely if she didn't name an actual reward. Backing down, she asked for 480 kilograms of 3-star metal ore instead, playing the sympathy card. Though in truth, she already had over 300 kilograms herself and was padding the request to resell the surplus for profit. Yi Han agreed without complaint, leaving Zhu Yaju almost regretful she hadn't asked for even more. Though she reasoned that since a 3-star shelter upgrade only needed 500 kilograms total and she'd already claimed 480 kilograms of it, pushing further would have been excessive. With both rewards settled, Yi Han moved to his next plan, using this opportunity to harvest resources across the Forest of Despair. He had Gojo relay a message to the whole region on his behalf. Despite Gojo's opening line sounding uncomfortably like dialogue from an old wartime collaborator drama, and despite many in the region still resenting him as something of a traitor for his earlier antics, the message announced that Yi Han was offering a bounty for the location of any 4-star mist beasts across the entire Forest of Despair. Reporters would receive 1/5 of the beast's meat once Yi Han arrived to kill it, with additional rewards available for information about 4-star ruins, keys, and locations, and a warning that this was a one-time opportunity not to be missed.